Hello friends, welcome to the DotVVM virtual conference. I hope that you have seen the sessions we had prepared for you yesterday, and today we have more nice stuff coming right away in the few next hours. So let me start with the first session about DotVVM for web forms developers. I understand that it might look a little bit crazy to talk about ASP.NET Web Forms in 2020, but I believe that a lot of people will find this session interesting. And it doesn't mean that .vvm would be just a framework for web forms developers. It's not true. .vvm is a framework for everyone. If you love model view model approach for building web applications, .vvm can work for you really well. But if you are using ASP.NET Web Forms, you should also be interested in .vvm because it can make your life easier than anything else probably. So let's dig into how .vvm can help web forms developers in modernizing their web apps, or with just helping them to do their daily tasks easier than with web forms. So the reason why .vvm still cares about ASP.NET Web Forms is that there are a big number of applications that are still using this technology. We all know that these applications are quite old. I have seen a lot of Web Forms applications that are older than 15 years. And they are still being used, they are still actively developed, there are still new pages and new features coming into these applications. And of course, these applications need to be maintained. So if there is a new version of a browser, if there is some new requirements, new maybe system updates or new stuff on the web, these applications are trying to make this stuff available to the users. And these applications have been built for a lot of years, so there is a lot of features that may not be used anymore, but they are still in the code base. And of course, because if you work on the same project for such a long time, or maybe there can be a second or third generation of developers on that project, of course, there is some technological debt that is accumulating on this project, and .vvm can offer a way how to get rid of this. So these applications can, of course, be rewritten, and a lot of companies are trying to just rebuild them from scratch. However, even if you find the simplest way how to rewrite this application, this problem doesn't have any easy and quick solution. All the solutions you can possibly find can take months or maybe years, because if something was developed for 15 years, I cannot imagine how it could be completely rewritten in less than half of that time or something like that. Because we have a lot of new features, new languages, new technologies, but I don't think there is a technology that can increase the productivity so much that it could reduce the development time for by hundreds of percent. Yeah. So we are maybe productive than we were before, but I'm not sure if we are that more productive. So that's the reason why .vvm cares also about ASP.NET Web Forms migration path, because we find it very difficult for people maintaining these applications to continue working on them. And of course, in many cases, the complete rewrite is not possible. Basically, I have seen a lot of projects that chose the way of the full rewrite, and typically it means that you need to either hire a new team or just dedicate some people in the current team just for the new application. And if the old application is still being maintained and developed, it can be quite difficult, because not everybody understands what happens, and so you cannot dedicate people from the team fully to the new application. They will still be asked about how this works, and they will still need to help with the old part. And if you are new people, it means that there is a very difficult knowledge transfer from the old team to the new team, and of course you will have to implement some features twice because the old application is still being used. And if there is some feature that is really critical, you will have to implement it in the old version, and of course you will need to have it also in the new version, so there can be also some redundant work. Also, if you try to run those applications in parallel, so you will implement some parts of the applications in the new technologies, but you will need to run this side by side with the old application, it's probable that they will have separate data stores maybe, so it can mean that you would need to synchronize data from one part to the other, and in many cases I have seen that two-way synchronization was needed, and it's of course it's additional work, it's a lot of overhead, there can be conflicts in the data, so it's also not very easy to solve. And on the other hand, I don't want to look like that I'm against all rewrites. There are a lot of cases where rewrite can have also very positive impacts, and for me the crucial thing is that if you need to make a very fundamental changes in the application, and it doesn't matter if it's in the business logic or in the data model or in the user interface, if the application should change dramatically, then the rewrite is probably a better choice. However, if you are basically satisfied with the application and you just need to evolve it and make sure that it will be running for 10 or 15 years, then a rewrite can be very expensive and very effort and can bring a lot of effort. So there's other way of modernizing the application. If you you maintain an old web forms application, DotVVM allows you to modernize it incrementally. So you can take small pieces of code, do some changes, but the application can still work, and it can still be deployed, and you can still fix issues or add new features to the old part, and the new part is starting to grow, and basically all those rewrites can be done in place, so you are still working with the same application. So it's a continuous improvement. You will take page by page or something like that, and you can basically rewrite one page at a time or one feature at a time or something like that. And the most crucial thing for me is that the application can be deployed basically at any time. You can even run the old version of the page with the new version of page side by side, and you can let the users choose if they want to try the new version or if they want to keep with the old version. And you can see this from a lot of services, software as a service applications, that there is, oh, we have a new experimental version, let's try it, and you can basically turn on some feature toggles or something like that. So this is even possible because you are still working in the same application, you have access to the same data, to the same authentication model, and everything else. And because the rewrite is incremental and you can just work by small pieces, it can be handled by the current team. If there is some critical issue, the entire team can focus on fixing that issue. But if there is no critical requirements, all the people in the team can take their pieces of code and try to rewrite them and modernize the application. And of course, if you do this, if you try to modernize your application, you should use this also as an opportunity to introduce more refactoring. So if there is some mess in the code base, you should use this opportunity to clean those things. So if you discover some feature that is not being used, I recommend to remove it or to make the code really clean, because it's natural that the mess is accumulating in old code bases. But if you are doing this change in the project, it's a good thing to do a refactoring together with the modernization. And I think that this way is great if you don't need to do significant changes in your application. If you just have what you have, if you are satisfied with that or somewhat satisfied with that, and you just need to, or you just want to use more modern tools, you just want to have your life easier and things like that. So for me, the difference between modernizing and rewriting is based on how many changes and or how different the new application should be from the old one. And there is the place for .vvm, because how can .vvm fit into this scenario? Basically, because .vvm supports .NET Framework and .NET Core with the same syntax, with the same principles, with the same view models, it can work as a transition bridge between .NET Framework and .NET Core. Yeah? So there are just two NuGet packages, .vvm.ASP.NET Core and .vvm.owen. And basically, if you exchange the owen package for ASP.NET Core package, all the rest of .vvm can remain the same, and the application should work. There are no other changes in this. Yeah, when we talk about .vvm pages and view models, of course, there can be authentication changes, there can be configuration, dependency injection, and things like that. But from the perspective of .vvm, it's only about changing or exchanging those two NuGet packages. The views and view models will remain as they were. Of course, if you have been using some old API from your view models, for example, if you have been using system web HTTP request, then you need to change this, but it's not a part of .vvm, it's a feature of ASP.NET Web Forms. So, of course, all dependencies or references to web forms must be replaced. But in normal .vvm applications, there is not many scenarios where you actually really need to work with the system web stuff. And most of the changes you will have to do is in the startup CS, because it has been changed from Owen to ASP.NET Core. There is not just one configure method, there are two methods, one for configuring services and one for configuring the request pipeline. And then if you get rid of web forms dependencies and use .vvm for rendering the pages, then you should be able to do the swap. So if you replace ASPX pages with something else, and it doesn't need to be .vvm, I will be showing how you can do this with .vvm, but if you decide to use any other technology, the principle is the same. If you want to move your old application to .NET Core, you need to get rid of web forms, because web forms are not supported on .NET Core. So you need to take all those ASPX pages and replace them with something else. And it can be a bunch of technologies. It can be Angular, it could be React, Blazor is very popular these days. And if I would think about rewrite, I would be looking maybe at Angular, React, or maybe Blazor, because this is the fundamental change. Yeah, all those frameworks are using the client-side logic, so most of the application logic can work on the client side, which means that you will need to make the data on the server accessible to the clients. In this case, in all these three technologies, you would need to build some kind of API, either REST or gRPC or anything like that, but there is you just need to get your data to the client, because all those frameworks are running on the client side. There is a tiny exception of Blazor server, which technically runs on the server side, but I'm not sure how well Blazor server will be used in the production, because it needs a low latency and very reliable network to work really well. Yeah, so this is a tiny little exception, but in general, if you are thinking about a WebAssembly version of Blazor, then you need to get the data somehow to the client side, to the client's browser, which means that you will need to build API. And it doesn't need to be difficult, but in many cases, it's not as easy as that expose the business logic as REST API controllers. Very often you will need to do significant changes in the business logic. If you think about modernizing approach, then .vvm can really help, because you can stay in the same application and you can do the incremental modernization, page by page, class by class, piece by piece, and feature by feature. So with Angular, React, or Blazor, you will need to build and maintain an API. If you already have an API, then this is a little bit easier, but in general the application runs in the browser, so it needs to talk with the database and it should do it through some API. Also, there are performance considerations. If the application is running on the server, and for example, imagine that you need to load, I don't know, customer details page. And on this page, there is a list of orders, there is the customer profile, there is a list, maybe customer address. And these parts of the page may need to do quite a lot of requests to the database. And they can be dependent on each other. So you first need to load the customer details, so you would be able to look for the recent orders. And if you find some recent orders, then you can show some summary information or things like that. So when you get one HTTP request on the server, then the server can do many round trips to the database, and then you are able to render the page. And because typically the server is very close to the database, the latency between the server and database is very small. It can be milliseconds or even less. However, if you just take all your database queries and expose them as REST API operations, for example, then all those queries would get the latency between the client and the server. And it can be much larger. It can be way larger. It can be tens or even hundreds of milliseconds. And then if you will need 10 queries to display the page, you would have to do either asynchronous loading, which complicates more things, or you would need to optimize the communication, so maybe do more queries at once. Yeah, so maybe do a one huge HTTP request, which will get data aggregated for all the parts the page will really need. Maybe a GraphQL can help with this, because this is where this technology is aiming. However, implementing the GraphQL on the server side is also not very easy. So there are a lot of approaches and a lot of complications, and it is typically not one-to-one copy of the current business layer. You will have to think this API through to make sure that it the application would be performant enough. So it's not impossible, but it wouldn't be very easy to do. Also, if you choose the JavaScript framework like Angular and React, it means that you need to learn quite a lot of things, not only the JavaScript language, which isn't so difficult, but also all the ecosystem, because you will probably use Webpack, you will probably use NPM, and all those tools you will need to compile, for example, your TypeScripts to JavaScript, so you may use Rollup, or then there is a lot of libraries, a lot of tools, how to do things, and it's also quite differentiated, so everybody will recommend you their own way of doing things, so it's hard to find one consistent approach for this. Yeah, so it might also include a lot of research and things like that. And of course, if you try to run the new application, which would probably have the .NET Core backend, side by side with the .NET Framework application, because you wouldn't be sitting 6 years in the cellar and rewriting and then boom, deploy everything at once. Probably you will run those applications in parallel, so you will have to deal with different authentication model, maybe different configuration, and if those applications would have separate data stores, you may probably need to synchronize some data. So everything is possible. There are a lot of technical issues, but they are all solvable pretty easily. However, the transition is not really simple. With the modernization scenario of .vvm, it's a little bit easier, because you can access the database directly. You are running in the same application. You can use the same business layer without almost any changes. Maybe there will be some things in the business layer you will need to wrap in order to be used in .vvm, but it's all in the C#, so you have compile time, control, and all those things. And in most cases you wouldn't even need to do that. It really depends on how your business logic is separated from the UI. If it's well separated, then it will be very easy. If the business logic is in the code behind files, then you should expect some refactoring to be done. But still, it will probably be easier than refactoring this into a REST API and then consuming that API and working with that on the client side. So this should be also a little bit easier. And if your business logic is well separated from the UI, it will be trivial. The biggest thing for me is that the business logic really doesn't need a lot of refactoring. We will see this in a few minutes in the demo, and you just keep it as is, which means that it's not such a risky thing to start to use this method, because there is not a big chance that you would need to touch the business logic, and therefore you probably won't create many breaking changes. Of course, there can be some breaking changes that will happen, but it shouldn't be very severe. There should be quite a small number of them. And also, what can also be interesting, all the web forms application, I have seen they were using some ancient authentication models like forms authentication or Windows authentication. And because you are just adding new features, new framework, but in the same application, it will just integrate with what you already have. So if you need to change the authentication model, which especially in the enterprise environment can take just 1 year to communicate and to design how the new authentication should work. So you don't need to wait until this is resolved and designed and approved. You just can add new pages into this application without changing the authentication model. And then after you are ready to change the authentication model to some more modern version, you can do this after you are completely ready for that. So yes, this is also a little bit easier than if you plan to do a full rewrite. So I have tried to create some helpful animation of how the migration process with .vvm can work. And again, please don't expect that it's some wizard where you can click next, finish, and boom, you have your web forms application ported to .NET Core. You need to replace web form with something else, which means rewriting a significant part of the application. You need to rewrite all the ASPX pages and code behind files which are dependent on web forms. So you need to get rid of one quite big framework in the application and change it for another. So we can be talking about weeks or maybe months or maybe a small number of years if the application is really huge. I have seen web forms applications with thousands of ASPX pages. So then in that case, you should expect that the migration will take, for example, 2 or 3 years or something like that. Again, it really depends on how complicated those pages are. But if the application is reasonably small, then you can do this change really quickly. And for a lot of applications I have ever seen, in most cases, I think that it should be possible to rewrite them in months. Yeah, so maybe in less than 1 year. It really depends on how well the business logic is separated and how much refactoring will be needed during the process. So in the initial state, you will have your application which will just use .NET Framework. So probably I hope that it's at least .NET Framework 4.5.1, which is the lowest version that is supported by .vvm. If you are on an older version, you need to upgrade to .NET 4.5.1 at least. And then in the application process, there is the web forms pipeline, which is responsible for handling all the requests. So if you get an HTTP request, it can go through typically the forms authentication. It can be, of course, anything else, but this is the most common scenario. And it's routed to some ASPX page, which probably is using some master page, because all the ASP.NET Web Forms application are probably using master pages, and the request is dispatched. Yeah? And if you get a request that points to another page, again, the Web Forms pipeline will take care of it, and it will route it to the specific page and do everything that needs to be done. The next step in this, so this is the initial state. This is how it looks at the beginning. And if you want to start with the .vvm modernization process, you need to add two NuGet packages. First is .vvm.owin, which is the Owin version of .vvm. And then there is a Microsoft Owin host system web. You may have this package in your application already, because some frameworks need it. If you are, for example, using Web API or SignalR, there is a chance that you will already have Owin host system web installed in your project. If it's not there, you need to add it. And what it does is that it will add a second pipeline to the application. So the Web Forms pipeline will be here, and it will be wrapped with the Owin request pipeline. It's hard to say if they are side by side, or if the Owin is wrapping the Web Forms, or if Web Forms is wrapping the Owin pipeline, because in reality they can touch the request in various phases in the IIS pipeline, but they are both integrated with the IIS pipeline. And when you get the HTTP request, then it first gets to the Owin pipeline that can handle it by itself. And if it cannot handle it, it will just move it, or it will just delegate it to the Web Forms pipeline, which can do what it has been doing for all the time before. Yeah, so when we now get an HTTP request and it goes to an ASPX page, we haven't been rewriting anything by that time. Yes, everything is still in Web Forms. Then the Owin will just pass the request to the ASP.NET Web Forms pipeline, which will handle it as usual. So there is no change in this, really. Yeah, but the pipeline is there, and it's ready for us to plug the new version in. So now we want to start with the modernization process. So we can pick some ASPX page. So I have marked this one, and I've moved it a little bit in the background, because we can still keep it in the project. If anything breaks, we can just fix this quickly by just reverting back to the previous version that was working. So I recommend to keep these pages for some time. If you really find some issues, you can quickly redeploy new version with the old version of the page. And the first thing we will need to do is to create a copy of the master page and rewrite it in .vvm. So this is the first thing we should start rewriting. It's the master page. Or of course, if the application has more master pages, we should rewrite all of them, because this is typically the thing that is used everywhere. So we should start with this. And you will see in the demo that a rewrite of the master page is not very complicated typically. So we will see how it can be done. And then when we have the master page, we can start rewriting the ASPX page into .vvm syntax, which means the extension will be .html. Yeah? And mostly it's a copy paste. And then you will need to change Web Forms controls with some .vvm controls. There are some controls that are very similar, for example, the repeater and also the grid view. There are some controls which do not have .vvm equivalents yet. The biggest issue for me are the login controls, because if you have been using the ASP login, ASP forgotten password wizard, there are no equivalent controls in .vvm. You need to create the forms by yourself, but maybe you can leave these pages and migrate them at the very end, because there is a chance that you would be exchanging force authentication with some other authentication model that will maybe not need these pages at all. Because if you, for example, switch to, I don't know, social login providers, or for example Azure Active Directory, then you won't need your login form, you won't need your forgotten password process, because it's handled by the external identity provider. So I recommend to keep the authentication pages as they are, and rewrite them at the very end of the migration process, because unless you are really sure that you want to switch the authentication model now. Yeah, so I would start with something simpler, which doesn't need to work with authentication much, and you just take one page at a time and you can rewrite it in DOT-HTML syntax. And once you register a .vvm route in the OWIN request pipeline, then this happens. So when you get a request that points to an old version of the application, some old page that haven't been migrated yet, so it will be passed to the web forms pipeline and dispatched like usual. So there are no changes in this. And if you push a request for a new page, then the OWIN pipeline will handle it by itself, and it won't pass it to the web forms pipeline. So the old page wouldn't be used, and a new page will be used to handle the request. Yeah, and this is running in the same application with the same authentication model. You will see that the authentication integrates with what is been using in web forms, and you will see that it will just work side by side in the same application. So this is how you can start the migration. You can pick one page, maybe one page that is not critical at all, create a master page in .vvm, and of course you will use the same CSS, so the master page will look exactly the same. The users shouldn't be able to see the difference. And then you can just take the ASPX page and rewrite it and start using it instead of the old version. And if you keep the old version there, you still are able to do a quick revert. So if you find that something is not working there, you can just remove one routing rule, so the OWIN wouldn't try to handle this page, and just pass the request to the web forms pipeline, which will work as it was working before. Yeah, so this is how it can work, and there is also a safe plan B if anything goes wrong. Okay, so then the migration in progress, and this phase can take quite a long time, because probably there can be hundreds of those pages. So you will be picking pages, maybe one at a time, or you can port this group by group, for example. It depends on the capacities, it depends on the current situation, current requirements from the users. Yeah, it depends. Also, you can add new pages in this process, because the users will probably require new features to be delivered. Yeah, so I will be picking some pages for migrations, and I will try to rewrite them, and once I'm ready, I will register a routing rule for them, so they will be handled by .vvm. So this is the request to the first old page that hasn't been migrated. So again, it will go through the web forms pipeline, and if it's a new request to some OWIN, some new already rewritten page, it will go through the OWIN pipeline and be dispatched like this. And now we are almost there. So again, I will be picking the last page for migration and replace it with the .html version. And then all the requests should go through the OWIN pipeline through .vvm. And the web forms pipeline will be only used for the authentication, or may be avoided completely. And once you get rid of all dependencies on the web forms, then you will be able to switch to .NET Core. So we can remove the master page, we can remove the old pages, and now the entire application is using .vvm. And now we should think about going to .NET Core. So we can uninstall the OWIN packages, we can uninstall .vvm.owin, and now you can either change your CS approach, so it will use the new short brief syntax, and it will use .NET Core, or you can just create a project next to the original one in .NET Core and just copy all the .vvm pages and copy all the code that's involved. It doesn't matter. But this new project will use .vvm.ASP.NET Core package. But the syntax of these files and the view models, there are no changes in this. Really, nothing will change here. And you just need to remove the web forms So the OWIN and ASP.NET Web Forms request pipeline will be away, and it will be replaced with ASP.NET Core request pipeline. This step involves rewrite of the startup CS file. So there is the configuration of the pipeline for OWIN, so you will need to convert it to ASP.NET Core pipeline and things like that. Maybe there will be some other changes because there is different logging mechanisms on ASP.NET Core. There are also some differences in the caching, and there are differences, for example, in the dependency injection. Maybe you have been using some IOCDI container like Unity or Castle Windsor on the .NET Framework. Now with .NET Core, you can still use these containers, or you can replace them with the dependency injection, which is part of the .NET Core, the Microsoft Extensions dependency injection package. It's up to you. There can be more changes at a time at this step, and all the changes are global. They are affecting the entire application, so you should then test the entire application thoroughly. But it's doable. And finally, the forms authentication, of course, is also not supported in the ASP.NET Core, so you will need to replace it with some ASP.NET Core authentication. And this can mean that it won't be using cookies anymore. Maybe you will use some JWT tokens or Azure Active Directory or something like that, so it doesn't need to be authentication tickets in the cookies. But if you are still happy with your own login forms and reset password processes, and maybe you are using ASP.NET Identity to persist the user accounts, then you will probably use the ASP.NET Core cookies authentication, which will also work. Yeah, so this is how the process looks like. And now when you switch the project to .NET Core, you are finished. The migration is over. Of course, it's not such quick like my 10 minutes talking. It will take weeks or months, hopefully not years, but still most of the business logic can remain as is, because we have been only rewriting ASPX pages and their code behind files into DOT HTML pages and their view models. Yeah. If these code behinds have been calling any services in the application, if they have been, for example, using Entity Framework, that can stay as it was. Yeah, so you don't need to rewrite that. You don't need to even introduce new APIs and or change significantly the queries that are being sent to the database. Yeah, so now all the requests are routed through this pipeline and handled by this, and everything is handled by .VVM. So now you are running on .NET Core. There are a few things to consider. Of course, as I mentioned several times, you need to rewrite the front-end files, which means ASPX, ASCX, so the user controls, and master pages. If you are also using the app themes or other web forms features, like the mobile versions of the controls or mobile pages and things like that, these will also need to be redone because they are also concerning web forms. Also, all the references to the system.web.something will need to be changed because system web is not ported to .NET Core, and it never will be. Yeah, so this is the thing. And also their code behinds for these pages should be refactored in the view models, and that's what you will see in the demo I will be showing in a few minutes. And if you have been using data source controls in the ASPX pages, like the SQL data source or things like that, or if you have been using business logic in your code behind files, then some refactoring will be needed. So that's an issue, and it can make these tasks more difficult. But if your business logic is separated, then it will be easier. So take this as an opportunity not just to move all the garbage from the code behind to your view models, which is of course possible, but I would very try to discourage you from doing this. Otherwise, instead, you should just refactor these things out to some services or to some other project, maybe some class library or something like that, and really decide what is the logic that is connected to the presentation of the data, and what is the business rules, what is the business logic, what is the real functionality that can be decoupled from the user interface. Yeah, so you will see how we can deal with this. And there can be some other things that can prevent you from the migration to .NET Core. If you are using Entity Framework, you need to upgrade it to Entity Framework 6.3, which is supported starting .NET Core 3.0. If you think about rewriting or changing Entity Framework with Entity Framework Core, it is of course possible, but it can be also quite difficult, because EF Core was rewritten from scratch basically, and it is somewhat similar, but the internal implementation is very different. So the things that were fast in EF6 can be very slow in EF Core, and vice versa. There's a lot of improvements in EF Core, but still the complexity of queries that could be translated by EF6 is much bigger than what you can afford with EF Core. So in EF Core, if you want to switch EF to EF Core, there is a very high chance that you would need to rewrite many queries, because EF6 could translate almost everything to the database. However, EF Core is not so good in that. It aims to maybe different use cases or to different paradigms on top of which the database applications are written right now. It's more than 10 years younger than the classic EF, so there is also a fundamental difference of how the queries are dispatched and evaluated. So maybe you can stay with Entity Framework if you upgrade to 6.3, because this is supported on .NET Core, and it will work as it was. If you have been using WCF services, then you should find some way either to rewrite them or to replace them with something else. There is actually an GitHub repo with the WCF source codes, so you can try this open source version that was released under .NET Foundation. But I haven't tested it, so I don't know how many differences there are, and if it's just that you can just install some NuGet packages in the project and the WCF services would magically start working. I think that there's at least one difference. You would have to move the configuration from webconfig to the C# code, because there is basically no webconfig in ASP.NET Core. So the configuration should be done from the C# code. And there can be a lot of other differences, because a lot of things in WCF were relying on machine keys, for example, and they are also solved completely differently in .NET Core. So I haven't tried this. If you try to do this, let us know how it worked, because I'm really interested in seeing the experience of other people doing this. We have chosen the way to rewrite the WCF services to something else, because we were using REST endpoints anyway inside WCF, so we have rewritten them to Web API, which is also using REST. And in the migration process, don't be afraid of doing larger refactorings. Of course, you need to test if you haven't break anything, but if you see some parts that are not being used anymore, don't be afraid of removing them. If you need something from it, you will be able to find it in your Git repo in the history, but don't pollute your code base with unnecessary code, because it makes the maintenance much more difficult. Yeah, so don't be afraid of doing larger changes in the code, because they can look difficult at the beginning, but over time you will be very happy that you have done them. Yeah, so that's a recommendation from my experience, because we have been moving several projects using this way to .NET Core, and this is what our experience was in the past. Okay, so complete migration scenario means it's described in our sample repo. We have a version for C#. We have also version for VB.NET. So if you are using ASP.NET Web Forms with Visual Basic, there is a repo which shows how to do it. Unfortunately, .vvm doesn't work well with VB. So if this process means that the pages and the view models will be rewritten to C#. However, the business logic can stay in VB because it will be referenced from the C# project. So you will be your view models will be in C#, but you can call your VB functions and VB classes from the view models. So only the UI will use C# as a language, but if your business logic is in VB.NET, you can still use this scenario. I have this repo opened here, so this is the C# version. There is a link for the VB version here in this node. So if you are interested in this VB version, click here. And there are several branches in this repo. So there is the first stage, initial state, where the application is only in web forms. There is the step where I have installed .vvm. Then there is a showcase how the migration in progress looks like. So some pages are already in .vvm, some are still in the web forms. Here is how it looks when the migration is completed, but we are still in the .NET framework. And the last branch shows the new project that is ported to .NET Core. So if you clone the repo, you can browse these branches and see what has changed between them. So you will get the idea of the individual steps. And it's also described here in the README, so there are exact instructions how you should work. So basically you install .vvm OWIN and Microsoft OWIN host system web package. You can use this startup, this .vvm startup, and you need to add some GUID in this project. I will show it in the demo. And we have also a page with a cheat sheet of differences between .vvm and web forms. So you can read through this. There are examples how it works and how the syntax looks like in web forms and how it looks like in .vvm. So we are just here. There are not all differences, but the main fundamental differences, if you are a web forms developer, I recommend to read this first because you will get the idea of what's different in web forms and in .vvm. Yeah. And there is also a recording of a session from .NET Conf where I have described this process. So if you don't want to browse these branches, you can just see the video, which is linked here in the README. Okay. And we have created one other thing. So the .vvm syntax is different from ASPX. We are also using server controls, but we have different syntax for data binding, and the controls aren't exactly the same. Sometimes the name and property names are similar or same, but the rest is different. So it's not just that you will replace ASP prefix to DOT and it would work. There are more transforms. However, we have created a simple tool that can do the basic transforms for you. It's called ASPX Converter, and it's available on .vvm.com/webforms/convert, and it can do simple transforms. So do not expect it to be 100% complete migration tool. It's nothing like that, but it can help you with the mundane and boring transforms that are easy to do. And of course we will be adding more and more transforms and rules to this tool, so I hope that we will be able to simplify the migration process from from ASP.NET Web Forms syntax to .vvm syntax. So let's look at the demo of how it works. First, I will run this application. It's a simple web forms application. It's just one page, and it's not a real web forms application. I have written it a few weeks ago, but I have tried to compose it in a way that you would see all the differences between the .vvm markup and the ASPX markup. Of course, migrating a real application would be more difficult, and I'm not trying to pretend that migration process to .vvm is that easy, but for the demo purposes, I didn't want to take some real world large application because it would scare everyone to death even before we even open the solution. So that's why I create an artificial web forms page that we would be migrating. Okay, so there is a simple login page. It's using the ASP login control. So this is one thing that it's not supported in .vvm. In .vvm, you would need to create your own login form, but maybe you wouldn't even need it if you decide to change the authentication model together with the migration. Okay, so now I'm logging in the application, and it's a quite easy page where I can add a task. So new task. I can select some categories and click add task, and it will add a row into list with some text. So basically I'm using a repeater for rendering this list, and also there are nested repeaters because those tags are being rendered also with a repeater control. So it's not a very difficult page. However, you will see that I will be able to migrate it to .vvm in a few minutes. Okay, let's look how it looks, how the markup looks like. So this is my master page. So you can see I'm including Bootstrap, I'm including some JavaScripts, and my custom CSS for the badges to have the different colors. And this is the classic ASP.NET syntax. So there is the form runner server and things like that. I'm using Bootstrap navigation. So this is this crazy long hierarchy of nav and div and span elements with those CSS classes. That's why I really like Bootstrap for .vvm controls, because this is just BS responsive navigation, and I will just add buttons inside and it will render all this clutter for me. However, now we are in web form, so we are doing this the classic way. And this is the responsive navigation toggle. It's not interesting. This is the title. And here in the menu, I have a login view. So this is a drop-down menu with the logout button. I'm using the login view control, and in the logged in template, I have this drop-down menu. I'm using login name control to print out the current username. I'm using the login status so I can do this logout button, which is done in web forms using logout status button. Yeah, and then there is just the content placeholder, so the contents of default ASPX will go here. So let's look to default ASPX. I have the panel, and I'm using the panel because I want, when I add new task and when I'm in the text box and press enter, I want it to submit the form. And because everything in web forms is one huge form, so I'm using ASP panel to specify my default button. Yeah, so when I press enter in this text box, this button will be pressed. That's the feature of web forms and this default button property. And for categories, I'm using checkbox list. So I'm giving it a collection of categories and it will render all these checkboxes. Unfortunately, it's rendering them in a table, so it's hard to make it really responsive, and you would need to build your own repeater with checkboxes if you want to use, for example, Bootstrap columns or something like that. Yeah, because this is a table, so if the page is not very wide, this wouldn't wrap to multiple lines. Yeah, unfortunately. Okay, so let's continue. There is the add task button, and here we have the repeater with the tasks. And because I'm using the nested repeater and there is no way to data bind inside it, I need to override the onItem data bound event. And in this event, I need to set the data source to my inner repeater. So basically what I'm doing in the data bound, if it's not a header and footer, if it's item or alternating item, I'm looking for the tasks categories repeater, which is the inner repeater. And I'm just filling it, setting data source and calling data bind. Yeah, so this is how I can work with nested repeaters in web forms. It's not very easy to do. There is some typecasts and it's easy to make mistake here. And it's not very good, but still we have been used for it. Also, this is what also have been driving me nuts in web forms. There is the header template, which contains just the opening tag, and there is the footer template, which contains just the closing tag, and we don't have such crazy things in .vvm. Yeah, so this is what will need to be refactored, for example. Okay, so this is how it works. In the code behind, there is also some logic that calls my task service, which is doing all the entity framework magic. So right now in this application, I have already refactored my business logic to a separate class, task service. So it's not here in the code behind, but of course I can imagine that a lot of applications unfortunately are opening their DB context here and just working with the database right here in the code behind files, which I would not recommend. So if before you start migrating, you should just refactor this logic out. You don't need to use the dependency injection in WebForce if you don't have this set up. Just create instance of the service, and later when we rewrite this into .vvm, we can start using dependency injection. But move this at least to different classes, because otherwise it's a mess. You don't want to move just to the view models. Okay, so that's it. And let's start migrating. I have already finished few steps. So I have installed .vvm.owin package and also the Microsoft Owin host system web packages. If you look in the packages config, these packages have a lot of dependencies. So I have installed .vvm.owin. And I have installed Microsoft Owin host system web. The other packages are mostly the dependencies of these two packages. .vvm is using .NET Standard, so if you can upgrade your project to latest .NET framework, the number of NuGet packages will be significantly less, because the new .NET framework versions support .NET Standard without adding any additional packages, or these are just meta packages which do not add any real references. However, I have just installed these two packages. Then I have added Owin startup class, which you can do like this. There is in the add new item, there is an item called Owin startup class. So you can add it to the project. And I have moved all the .vvm related stuff into this v2 folder, so it would be separated from the rest of the application. It's up to you. I just wanted to show that it doesn't need to be in the root of the website. It can be anywhere in your structure. So for example, if your application has more sections and you first want to try .vvm on some, I don't know, admin section or something like that, which is not exposed to a lot of users, you can of course use .vvm in just one subfolder in your project. It doesn't need to be here in the root. So for making clear what's .vvm related and what's not, I have created the v2 folder. So I have added the Owin startup class, and it has to be marked with this attribute so Owin could find it. There can be only one class marked like this. And in the configuration method, I am adding .vvm middleware. So I am calling appuse.vvm, and I need to pass some parameters to it. The first is application physical path. So I'm taking this from the hosting environment. And this is system web stuff. So once I move this to .NET Core, I will need to change this parameter to a .NET Core version of this, because this is only part of .NET Framework, but this is just one property, so it's not easy. But if you are using hosting environment in your code, that's one of the things that will need to be replaced. So prepare, maybe add this path to some constant or to some static class, or maybe hide it behind some interface, so you would be able to change the implementation later. Then the second parameter is if it's development environment, because .vvm will display more detailed error pages if you are running in the development environment. So you can do this. So this is how I register .vvm in the pipeline. And in the .vvm startup, I'm just, these are just empty methods. I'm not configuring anything. This line is commented out. And in the configure services, I'm just registering default upload download service of .vvm to some temporary directory. And I'm registering my business logic into the iService collection, which is the default IOCDI solution of .NET Core. And also because this library is .NET standard, so .vvm will be able to use it even if you are running in .NET Framework. So I have started using dependency injection, Microsoft Extensions dependency injection, that I will be using on .NET Core, and I'm using it right now with .NET Framework. So I will be prepared for that, and I wouldn't need to introduce the dependency injection later in the view models. I will have it there ready from the first moment. And right now I don't have any .vvm pages in the application and nothing configured in the route table, but it works. Yeah, so you have seen that this application still works. So there are really no changes in that. Yeah, so I can log out and I'm redirected back to the login page, and I can sign in again and I'm back here. So everything is right now in the web forms, but we can now start rewriting it. Okay? So first thing we need to migrate is the master page, because all the pages live in the master page, so the first .vvm page will need it. So let's create a master page here. So in the views directory here, I will create a new item and look for .vvm section here, and I'm adding a new master page. So I will use the same names, so it's clear what is a rewrite of what. So I will keep the name. So in web forms it's site.master. In .vvm it will be site, and the extension is dot master. Okay, I will want to have my view model for the master page created. So that's it. And this is my master page. And you can see that it's quite similar. There is just no form run at server because .vvm doesn't need the entire page to be one huge form. And instead of ASP content placeholder, we have .dot content placeholder. Okay, so this is the master page. And let's just copy paste this markup from web forms. And now I will open the web forms converter. So I will go to .vvm.com/webforms/convert, or you can just click on this button, SPX converter. And unfortunately, the bigger screen you have, the better, because we didn't had time to make some full screen mode of this. But so this text area is quite small, but if you have a larger screen, you will be more happy with this. And of course, we will be improving this application, so you can expect it to be better. Okay, so I have pasted my master page code here and click continue. And this tool will analyze all those things that it can, and it will offer me some suggestions. So for example, in .vvm, we do not need the run at server attribute. So you can expand this section, and there will be all the occurrences of run at server. If you click on show, it will mark this in the markup. Yeah, so you will see that this is here. And if you click on apply fix, we will just change the markup for you, so you can easily remove the run at server. Okay, so now we are here, and I can say, okay, I trust the .vvm people, so let's apply all the fixes. So now it should remove all the run at server I had in my code. Yeah. Then there are two content placeholders in the page. So if you click, you can see there is one content placeholder and there is a second, yeah, in the page. So I can also let them change to dot content placeholder. Okay, so I'm all set, which doesn't mean that this page will work right away in .vvm, but it means that this tool doesn't know any other rules that it could suggest to me. So let's just copy the code and let's paste it here to .vvm master page. Okay. And now this first directive, it's not being used, it's not needed, so I can safely remove it. And now you should go through the code and review everything if it's okay. Yeah. So this is just plain HTML. This content placeholder is here. In .vvm you need to have ID on it, so this is correct. The script, there is no changes in that. In .vvm we don't need the form element to wrap the entire page, so goodbye my form. Let's remove it. And this is just bootstrap stuff, this is just bootstrap stuff. And if you have the commercial version of the .vvm extension, it's really helpful because it can display these squiggles if it finds some problems. It doesn't discover everything, but it can discover quite a lot of things. And it seems that there is no login view control in .vvm. So we need to find an alternative. And the alternative for this is DOT authenticated view. And the tool could translate login view into authenticated view because the structure is similar, but we didn't introduce this feature yet. But we have non-authenticated template and we have authenticated template. So the first template will be displayed to the users who are not signed in. So let's move this content right here. And then let's move this content right here. Okay, so this is one transform, and I'm sure that the tool will support this soon because this transform is pretty easy. Okay, so what we have next? So this should be fine. This is a little issue because we don't want to have hard-coded links in the application, but it's not a big issue right now because this page is not ported to .vvm. However, if this link leads to a page that has been ported, I really suggest to replace it with DOT route link control and use routes to generate your URLs. It will make all the things easier. Okay, but now let's continue. For now, we can live with this. And here, this is just bootstrap stuff, and there is the login name control. We also do not have login name control, but what you can do is to look up in your context and look at the current user identity and print out the name. And because we don't have this username in the view model, we can do two things. We can add a username property in the view model and display it using value binding. But since there is no way how the user can change the username except of logging in as somebody else, which would reload the page probably, we can use a trick. We can use a resource binding, and we can print out context.http context.user identity name. And because it's a resource binding, it will be evaluated on the server. So in the result HTML, just the name of the user will be printed out, and there would be no knockout.js data bind generated. So we can replace login name with this, and it should work. And there is the login status control, which can generate logout button. In .vvm, we don't have anything like login status control, so you need to create your own button. And it's a link, so we will use link button. Text will be sign out, and the click handler, we will call some sign out function, which I don't have right now, but it doesn't matter. I will let it generate it. But before I do that, I will also disable validation on this button, because if you are on some form, you didn't fill all the values, and you want to sign out, we shouldn't be asking you to first fill out the form before you can sign out. You can just sign out. So I will remove the validation on this button. Okay, so we can delete the login status, and I can generate the sign out method in my master page view model, which is a good thing because all the pages which are using master page will need this method. And because in .vvm, if your page is using some master page, the view models should also derive. Yeah, so the view model of the specific page should derive from the view model of the master page. So it will have the sign out method because it's declared in the base class. Yeah. So right now we are using the forms authentication in the web forms app. So if you open the web config, you will see we are using authentication mode forms. And so it's forms authentication. And I have, for the default ASPX page, I have allowed only signed in users. Yeah, so there is deny and question mark. Okay. So I can say forms authentication sign out, which will remove the authentication cookie, and then I should just redirect to the default page. So I can say contacts.redirect to local URL, and we will just redirect to root of the application, so the user will get to the home page. Okay, so forms authentication sign out, and this line will need to be changed when you change your authentication model, but it's just in one place. And of course you can abstract this, you can move it to some, I don't know, authentication logic class, so you will have all the authentication stuff on one place, so it will be easier to rewrite. Okay, so this is how it works. And now we need to port, so the master page should be ready by now, because there is just sorry, that's not it, this is it. So there is, the rest is fine, we don't have any running servers here, so it should work, and no squiggles. So let's see. And now I can port the default page. This is the only page in my application, so once I do it, I will have basically the migration finished. But let's do it. So I will add a new item, just .vvm page. I will name it also default. And so let's try it. And I need to embed it in master page, so I will choose my master page. So this default page would come into my master page. Okay, so let's do it. And we have the head content placeholder, which we won't probably need, but there is the main content placeholder. And again, I can use my converter tool. So I can just take all the markup and paste it in my converter tool and click on continue. And again, I can see some suggestions. So there is the ASP content, which can be changed to DOT content. So you can review those fixes and let this tool to fix them. Then there are run it server. So we have made sure that it works in the previous page. So I can say, okay, I trust. Let's remove run it server everywhere. And then we have some more sophisticated transforms right here. So for example, there is a text box control. Oh, the scrolling doesn't look like it's working. Okay, but this is the control. And .vvm knows that in .vvm we have DOT text box, and if you are using text box, you will probably want a string property in your view model. So this task will do two things. It will change the text box to DOT text box, and also it will generate a data binding to a new task name property. And if you go to step 3, and you can always return back, there is a piece of code you can paste to your view model. So you have the string property generated right here. Yeah, so you can just copy and paste it to the view model. Of course, this is not perfect. You may want to change it, but if you are using text box, there is a very high chance that you will need this property right now. Okay, so this is the text box. Now we have the button. So if I click on show, the scrolling doesn't work every time, so we will fix this. And we can also change the button. And again, if you work with buttons, there is a high chance that you will need a click method. So it will generate a click method for you, and you just paste the code in it. Okay, so let's move next. There is a repeater, but before I click on the repeater, there is the header template and the footer template. Right now the tool doesn't suggest these recommendations in a correct order. We will be fixing this, but first I will use this move header template before the control. In .vvm, we don't like these unclosed elements. They are causing us a lot of problems. So basically, if you want to do this, you should enclose your repeater inside this div. So this task will move the contents of header template before the repeater. So apply fix, and you can see that this is before the repeater. There are some issues in the reformatting, but it can be fixed once you paste this code in Visual Studio and press the format keyboard shortcut. The same thing applies to the footer template, so we can move what's in the footer template after the repeater. So let's do this, and you can see now the repeater is in the div, and now we can change the repeater. So let's change repeater to ASP, so from ASP repeater to DOT repeater, and you can see that we have two repeaters. So this is the first, this is the second. So let's say apply, and we are done. Of course, there could be more suggestions that the tool might get in the future. For example, you can see these binding expressions the tool right now cannot replace, but we will be working on this. So I hope that we will succeed in bringing more rules into this. If you want to help us, it's possible, because if you go to this repo, you will see this ASPX converter project right here, and there are this project contains some rules. So there is the matching folder, and here are the matchers. So you can see how these rules are implemented. So you can, if you look in the button matcher, for example, so you can see that this rule is matching ASP button and ASP link button elements, and it generates some suggestions which can do the fixes, and these fixes can change the source code. They can generate something in the view model. So if you are interested in using this tool, and if you try it on a few pages and find a rule that could be implemented to help, then we will be happy to talk with you. And if you will be able to write this control matcher or attribute matcher, it would be the best thing in the world, because you can just send us a pull request and we can just approve it and deploy it to this tool. So if you start using this tool and if you miss any features in the tool, let us know. We will be happy to accept the suggestions, and if you are not afraid of using GitHub, feel free to send us pull requests. We will be very happy. More rules we will be able to include in the tool, the better, because the tool will be more helpful thanks to it. Okay, so now I am finished, so I can copy the code and paste it in my default .html file, and I will need to also go through all these things. So the first thing which can make problems is this panel, because there is no panel control in .vvm. But the only purpose of this panel is that we wanted to mark some button as a default button in the panel. So if you press enter, then the button will be clicked. And we can use the form element in HTML, which has the similar behavior. If you press enter in the form, then the first submit button in the form will be triggered. Yeah, so I can do this. Also, the CSS class is used in ASP controls, but we need to change it to class because we don't have any CSS class. And we can get rid of this default button because it's not needed. Okay, so right now then we are having the text box, which is fine. There is just a squiggle because I haven't created the view model yet, but I'm going to. Then there is a problem because the checkbox list control doesn't exist in .vvm. We will have to replace it with the repeater with checkboxes. But the good news is that thanks to it, you can make this responsive, because you can render these checkboxes not in the table, but just in one line, and they will wrap if the screen is narrow. Okay, so I will do this later, but let's continue. There is a button, so ID text, it's fine. There is a class, that should be this. And sorry, I have forgot to change CSS class in this text box right now, so that's it. We don't need the onClick attribute, and the tool should remove this because it generated this click. But again, this is more the rule ordering problem, because we have the rule for removing the onClick. But if we first rename ASP button to .dot button, then this rule is not applicable anymore. So this is the problem. But here in the click, I'm calling onAddTask click. I may want to rename this method, but not now. It's not so important. And this here, I have a squiggle for the repeater because it's missing the data source collection. Yeah, so it's missing the required property, and I won't need onItem data bound. So let's say data source equals, and I will for sure need some collection of tasks in my view model. So that's for now. And then we don't support transforming these expressions right now, but I think that we can do support for this. So let's just change this to the task name. And we are printing it out, so we need 2 curly braces. Then there was a data binding which was composing the CSS class. I need to also change it to a value binding, and we can use expressions here. So I will use this string, and instead of eval category color, I will just use category color because we are strongly typed. And now I can close the attribute, and that's it. And I need to print out category name, so let's do this. Okay, so now I'm almost ready. Item template, DOT repeater, everything is working. So now I have ported practically all the things in the markup except for this checkbox list. So let's do the checkbox list. Basically, I will have some collection categories, sorry, not data context, data source. So I will need some categories collection in my view model. And inside the repeater, I can add item template for more clarity. Inside, I will have DOT checkbox. Text of the checkbox will be the name of the category, so category name. And if somebody selects the checkbox, then this value will be used. So the ID property will be used as a value of the checkbox. And there is the checked items property, which points to a collection of the selected IDs. Yeah, so instead of this is a different approach than it was in web forms, because then in web forms checkbox had a collection of checkbox list had a collection of items, and you had to use where and filter out those that are selected. If you look in the code behind, there is this crazy expression, and it was an old collection which wasn't strongly typed, so I needed to use off type list item. Then I need to filter out those which are selected, and the values were strings, so I needed to parse them to integers. So to get category IDs, this was quite a long expression in web forms. In .vvm, we will just bind the checkboxes to the same collection, and it will be just a list of strings. The only thing you need to remember is that I need to go one scope up, because right now I'm in the repeater, and this collection of selected values is not in the category entries, it's in my main view model. So I can say selected IDs. New task category IDs. Yeah, so to keep this naming convention at least similar. Yeah, so I will be binding the result, the checked IDs, to a collection which will be basically a list of integers. Yeah, so this is how to replace checkbox list. So I can remove it right now. And now the only thing we need to do is to finalize the view model. So let's go back to the converter. I can grab at least this piece of code. It's not much, but still better than nothing. And let's paste this into our default view model. So I have a new task name. And if I return here in the default view model and press some keys, you can see then this squiggles just disappeared. So let's do this. Let's create categories. And it's not a collection, it's not an object because it doesn't know the data type. It will be list of category model. So let's import my using on the top. So this is the global list of categories. And let's figure out the logic later. Then there should be category name and ID, which is now correct because I have kept the names and I know that I'm using the category model class, which is defined in my business layer. Let's put it this way. And now I can generate new task category IDs, and hopefully it will generate the property for me. So yes, you can see it generated this thing. It doesn't know the type of IEnumerable, but I can change it to list of int. And .vvm doesn't like empty lists, so let's just initialize it to make sure that the value is there. Okay, so these two properties are for my new task. So this should be easy. And now the last squiggles are here. So I need to define the tasks in my view model. So let's do it. And again, it will be, sorry, this is some issue. The file was reverted back. So let's go back and let's write this manually. I don't know why it happens. Sometimes it just happens that the file is reverted to some previous state. It can be some bug in our extension. And this is a list of tasks. And because I'm using the task model and the data bindings, even in the previous version, were bound to the task model, then it works. This repeater, it needs the data source. So I'm just filling the data source and it should be categories and we are done. Yeah, so now we don't have any squiggles. So the markup should be ready. And it will be using the same CSS classes because I've just changed CSS class to class, but I've kept all those things. So now this should be ported. And to finish the default view model, we need to do just a couple of things. So let's look at the code behind. And now what we are doing. So in the pre-render, I'm loading categories and I'm loading tasks. So we can copy this out and we can override pre-render. So let's do this. And the isPostBack is hidden in context. So it's just a small change. And then we can copy out the load categories and load tasks. So let's do this. But right now we are not working in the controls in the UI. The biggest difference of MVVM approach is that you are not referencing components in the page by ID. Instead, you are just manipulating with these properties and the controls respond to them thanks to the data binding. Yeah? So you won't be writing textbox 1.text equals something. You will just manipulate with the controls using the view model properties. So basically what I need to say is the tasks equal, oh sorry, I have accidentally tried to run the project. That wasn't what I wanted to do. So I can create a new task service and get tasks. But as I said, I would want to use the dependency injection from the first moment. So what I can do is to build a constructor here and request a task service and I can also request a category service. And as I was showing yesterday, it's a great thing to have them defined as a field in my view model because they wouldn't be serialized into the JSON and sent to the client, which is exactly what I want. Okay, so load tasks, it's easy. And I won't be creating new task service. I will just use the one I had injected. And the same applies with the categories. We can just say categories equals category service dot get categories. That's it. Also, in the yesterday's session about MVVM, I explained that if the category list doesn't change ever in this page, we can use the bind server to client first request, so it won't be posted to the server and back on postbacks. So this is an optimization to save some network traffic, and loading task, it will just work, it will just fill the collection and the repeater will display all the items. And what's missing? Just adding the tasks. So let's go back here to the web forms markup and let's copy paste this, and it will be also much simpler than before because I don't need to read the state from my UI controls. I already have the task name and task category IDs properties in my view model, so I can remove this and I can just call task service at task, and I have new task name property in the view model and I have new task category IDs in my view model. Yeah, and it's a list of integers, exactly the same thing which my business layer works with. Yeah, so this is really great. Now I want to reset the form, so I can say new task name is string empty, new task category ID is clear, because on list there is the clear method, and I'm loading the task, which is a method I have already implemented. And now I'm finished and I have been able to rewrite this page. Okay, so let's build it. Hopefully, I don't know how I did it, but there are no compile errors. So let's do the final thing. Once I think that I'm ready for this page, I can enable it in the routing. And in order to be tested that both versions are working right now, so I can register it as a test. So when I enter the test URL in the browser, so let's refresh this. Okay, I need to sign in. So admin, password. And when I click on login, okay, this is still the web forms page. You can see all those nice view state. I love it. And now when and it still works because I haven't really touched it. Yeah, so it works. And when I go to /test, I have the same looking page. The first request to .vvm is here, and it looks almost the same. It doesn't look the same. Let's see why. It should be just different hierarchy of the elements. So this is the original, and the tags are here at the end of this at this line. Here the tags are on the separate line, and let's see why. Okay, there is the div element, which is probably causing this issue. Yeah, so these items are enclosed with the div, which is generated by the repeater. And on this page, when you look in the inspect tool, there is just the text and the span elements. So let's fix this. It shouldn't be very difficult. So let's go here, and this repeater is rendering a div element around the items. So let's tell him render wrapper tag equals false. And when I refresh this page, and when you just change the markup, you don't need to recompile the entire application. So I have just, okay, if I am rendering wrapper tag, I cannot use the ID attribute. So let's remove it because I still don't need it. I don't need control IDs much in .vvm. And now the page looks same. There are different paddings in the checkboxes because this was using table. This is not using table. They are just in the same line. But it's responsive because this line can wrap. So you can just add a tiny piece of CSS to make it look exactly the same pixel perfect. And now when I'm trying to add a new task, so I can check some categories and click on add task, and you can see that the page works exactly the same as before. Yeah. And once you say, okay, this old page, I really don't need you, then you can just go to the routing and use the same URL for the new page. So let's do this. And now we are reloading. We changed the C#, so now the application needs to be recompiled and run again. And now I'm on the default URL. And if you view the page source, you can see there is no view state. We are now running in .vvm. Yeah, so this is .vvm. Okay. Final thing, what about authentication? When I sign out, I'm going to the login page, but it's strange. I shouldn't, because I haven't restricted this for my default page, but maybe web forms sees their own route to default SPX, and therefore they redirect me to the login page. However, if you want to secure this page, you should use authorize attribute, because once I would remove the default page, I would lose this rule. So now I'm using the authorize attribute from .vvm framework runtime filters. And if you are not signed in, then in such case, this would handle all the authentication. So it integrates quite well with the authentication model. So now when I sign in, I will go to the default page, hopefully. Yeah, and it will work. And the authorize attribute won't kick me off because I still have the user identity. Yeah, the current request identity is the user is still signed up. So .vvm will allow this user. Yeah. If I wouldn't have the user identity, then .vvm would redirect to the login page exactly the same way as web forms are doing it. Yeah. So this is the authentication. Once you get rid of all web forms parts, you will need to change the authentication, but it shouldn't be so difficult because in .vvm the authorize attribute is the same on ASP.NET Classic and ASP.NET Core. Yeah. So in the view models, the only thing you will need to change is this, and if you place this into some separate file, it will be even easier to change later. So maybe signing out is different. Okay. So if you are wondering whether you should rewrite your application from scratch or if you want to modernize it, so it's a very difficult decision, and I'm not trying to say it's easy because there are a lot of parameters and a lot of criteria you need to include into this decision, and it's not only about the technology, it's also about the future requirements for the application. If you plan to do fundamental changes, then it would be probably the rewrite. If you just want to incrementally improve it, then the modernization might be more feasible. It also depends on the team member skill set. If you decide that you rewrite the application to some other technology, it means that all the people in the team will need to learn these things. Learning .vvm, of course, it's also learning a new technology, but .vvm is conceptually similar to web forms, so you wouldn't fight with so many different things. Yes, there will be differences, but there will be much less differences than with, for example, Angular or React. Also, it can be about budget, because when somebody in the management hears rewrite, they are thinking, okay, it will cost millions of dollars. We don't have that. Okay, so you need to modernize it. But it really depends. Maybe fundamental changes in the application can justify the investments, because now the application can earn or save much less money than the current version. So it's also a business decision. And of course, you should support new devices and new platforms. So if you are maybe thinking about progressive web apps, this can also affect the technology choice you may do. So it's not an easy decision, and probably there is not even a single person who can decide if you should modernize or rewrite. But if you decide for modernization, .vvm can help you. It's not 100%, it's not streamlined in that way that you would click next, finish in some wizard, but it's possible. And as you could see, porting a page, it's not a matter of hours, it's a matter of a few minutes during this session. Okay, so If you have any concerns, or if you have any plans of rewriting or modernizing your applications, let us know in the chat or in our Gitter channel, or write us an email. We will be happy to talk with you, happy to help you. And if you want us, for example, to help you with setting up .vvm in your project, we can help you with this either, because we, except of building .vvm, we are also a software company which is involved in many different software projects, so we can definitely help you with this. So if you have any questions, feel free to post them in the YouTube chat or in the Gitter chat we have in our .vvm repo, or just send us an email. We'll be really happy to talk to you. And after a short break, there will be another session, and the other sessions from my colleagues are pre-recorded, and the colleagues will be available during their session times in the chat. So feel free to ask them any questions, and they will be happy to answer and talk to you. So see you in a few minutes.
Hello everyone, my name is Milan Mikuš and I would like to tell you about some features in DotVVM that will make your application faster. DotVVM has lots and lots of features, but some of them are more suited towards data-heavy applications than others. Those features I'm going to show you. Maybe you've written something in .vvm and tried what we call like the old way or the classical way how to write web pages in .vvm. And I would like to show you today something a little bit different, and I wonder whether or not you might or might not use some of these features in your projects. First up is import directive. You might have already used it. It's used, for example, if you want to include resources in your page. Let's see code for this demo. And in here you can see very simple page. You have view model and you have some text resources that are generated as a class, and the resource texts are of course members of that class, and those are some simple texts pondering about maybe proportions of main wolves. So first off, there are 3 ways to get some texts into your web page. First is you reference the text with the full path. This is full path, namespace, type and everything, then the property containing the text. But to make your life easier, there is a feature called import directive, and the import directive lets you import the namespace so that you might use the type like this. The type is text, and you might use it now because it has been imported already here. Another way to do it is you can use type aliases. This works nearly exactly as using what in C#. You type alias your text as T, and then instead of writing it out fully, you can just use T dot property whatever. As you can see in the demo, this one is fairly simple. It works. It's lyrics from meme song pondering about maybe the proportions of main wolves aren't as you would expect. So we have imports, and that set us up for another cool feature that's called static command binding. Static command binding is not very new to .vvm, but since like .vvm, I think 2.0, it's become much more powerful. Before it was used as a nuanced thing, just to hide some dialogue or whatever, but now it should be a very powerful tool that will allow you to make faster applications. Let's see the code. The code is here. Static command binding first demo. First demo is just a really simple use case that most of people use static command for. You have some property in your view model, and the property is being toggled to switch something on and off. Here you can see the section uses visible attribute, and when this evaluates as true, the section is visible, otherwise it's false. In the demo, we go to static command section, and here is the toggle button. We toggle it, and as you can see, really the proportions of main wolves are really kind of... This is probably the most used use case for static command binding, but there is much more you can do. One of those things is, for example, you couple the imported type, and you can use this imported type to call methods on it. The method has to have, when we go to code, the method, I use F12 for that. You can see there is some very simple logic that will give you random cute image of seal depending on random seed. The important part here is that you have this allowed static command attribute on your function that you want to call. This is just static function. So we will take a look at usage now. And usage is like this. You go property equals, and you call the function from the server, and the server when it's evaluated the function returns the result and saves it into seal URL property in your view model. Then we make the image visible once the seal property has been set, and we bind the seal property to the source of the image. And what's important to note here, this is all happening on the client side. The client side expect this little piece of code that is evaluated on the server, then returns the result, but the property is set purely on client side. The visibility of image is decided on client side, and also the source is exchanged on client side. So, to the demo, I will show you also the diagnostic page for this. You go give me seal, and in a network tab we can see there is a response from the static command, and in the and first we go to parameters tab. Yeah, to explain this. This is a network section of debug console for this page, and on the network you can see all the calls that DotVVM makes to make your page work. And I just now selected one of the calls that happened when I clicked on the seal. When I click give me seal, you can see that new rows were added to the client section, to the network section, and so those are the network calls. One is the image itself, and the one is the call to the static command. It's this call over here, this call that is evaluated on server side. So when we click this, we can see in parameters what has been set to server. And as you can see, what we set is very minimal. It's a cross-site forgery token, and then there is some command ID. But other than that, we are not sending anything else. We are not sending view model, nothing, just parameters for the function. And we can see here the function has no parameters. So this args array is empty because there were no parameters to this function. And response, in response we can see the data that came back from the server, and as you can see it's the URL for the picture we are seeing right now. And here the picture has been loaded when client side exchanged the old URL for the new one. Compare this to give me seal the lame way, the old way. The lame way is we are doing full postback to the client side. We have to serialize our view model. The view model we are going to serialize is over here. Let me just go F12 on this, and here we are seeing the view model. Here is the properties we've been using so far. This is the toggle volt property, seal URL property that we've been looking at just now on the client side. This is the server side. When we do full postback, when we use the classical command binding, not the static command binding, we will have to serialize all this, send it to server, and the server will send us back some differences that happened in this view model, and then the client patches it all together and displays a result. Let's see now. We go back to the web page, to the client side, and we go give me the seal the lame way. So just reminder, the lame way uses full command over here. This is the difference. This is static command, and the other one is just ordinary command that most people would use. Like, this is the old way, and this is what's been with DotVVM from the start. It's what I am showing you here is where we can save data and make the application a little bit faster. little bit leaner, as I would say. So let's get to it. We go give me seal, and now we can see another postback from our page, and the postback looks like this. First we go to parameters, and we are looking at what's been sent in a payload as a request to our server, and we can see already that that it's grown quite a bit. Like, we are sending all this stuff, resources, paths, and we are sending whole view model, like everything in there. So, and the response is not that big, but it's thanks to this view model div, because first it calculates only the property, it calculates and sends back only properties that changed. So that saves some data for you, but the real pain point is that this whole view model is serialized and sent in the request whenever classical command is performed. Those are the differences. I just told you difference between command and static command. Static command, as we can see here, only sends absolutely necessary data for the one single function that gets evaluated on the server, while the classical command sends whole view model, then evaluates it, then sends a little bit more data back. Let's see something different you can go do with static command. This was fairly simple. We just called one server-side function, and this is another example. I would like to show you here is how you can profit from evaluating stuff on client side instead of server side. We can have simple calculator here. It's like what it does is, imagine you have some beam and you have to cut it into multiple pieces, and so like you know how long the one piece is, and you are wondering how many pieces you can get from this. So you have to first divide these two numbers, and then you round down the number of pieces, because like you cannot have like 4.5 pieces. And that doesn't make sense for your use case, let's say here. And so we can write our length here of the whole beam. Then we have length of the one piece of the beam, and we can see here, as soon as we stop typing, it updated with 13 pieces. We can cut from this large beam. How it's done on the servers, on the markup side, is like I have static command binding. Maybe you got used to already to this static command stuff. So yeah, I have this one property pieces. I set it again from the server, from the demo object that I have statically imported. This is like just a type. I'm calling again static function here. Let me go F12. This is like static command function that only thing it does is it floors the number I am giving to it. It's just for demo purposes. Like you would be better off in real use case to do it just in the JavaScript, but let's say we need to perform some more difficult operation here, so this would make sense. So first thing we have to have a look at here is like this expression here. When the text box changes, we want to recalculate the number of pieces. To do this, we can pass it to the round down function that gets called to the server. What I would like to show you here is how evaluating of static command works. So let's say you have this function and you need to pass it some parameters, and what happens is first the parameters get evaluated, and then after it has been evaluated on the client, the parameter part, it's this part over here, it gets sent to the client, to this function, And as I have shown you before, the result is returned and set to property pieces. So let's have a look how it looks in the inspect window, and we inspect this part over here, inspect element, for example. So we scope to this part of the page, and again we will have a look at network. Let me just clean it real quick for a new demo. Here we go. And what we do here is I change something. For example, I can make this like free, and I click away, so it gets evaluated. And now what the call is. Have a look at these parameters over here. We can have a look what gets passed to the function. These parameters get passed to the function I have just shown you as before. This is the round down function. The argument is evaluated already. The division has been done. Now it's sent to the server, and now again we can look at the response, and the response is just a single number. You can have a look at this whole page. There are many things here, but nothing else gets updated, just this one single number returned from the server. The important thing here that I just showed you is that parameters gets evaluated first, and then the call on the server is performed. So another demo. This demo is meant to show you another feature that many people don't know, or I made actually a little questionnaire about people I know that use DotVVM. There are really not that many people that use this feature, and I will show you just now. This feature is called blocks in commands. It's block operator. Sometimes you would like to perform some action and then perform something else along with that. For example, let's say you got saving to the database and you do the call, and then you would like to show some window or alert or anything like that saying the changes has been saved, or maybe you would like to update the list or do something like that. That's why we introduced rather this new operator that's like suspiciously similar to semicolon. And it's really not to say that we should write like 20,000 semicolon separated lines into one binding. That would be terrible. Everybody on the earth would suffer because of that. Here on the first button we have the snail call. The snail call is very useful call that does nothing else than make people uncomfortable by taking very, very long time. Like maybe if you have legacy systems, you have some calls like that. But this one is purposely set up so that, that you will wait 4 seconds until something happens. And then we would like to say it's finished. Let's try it out on the demo. I will just do start, and we will do 1, 2, 3, 4. And it's finished, it's done. What happened here is this call was taking very long time, and so this other property haven't updated until the first call had completed already. This is maybe a little bit counterintuitive, but due to limitation, due to certain limitation, like I can tell you which limitation it is. Like first and foremost, we want to keep view model consistent, and then therefore when we do update operations on the view model, we want to update everything at once in one command. So we want to avoid situation where command is running, updates some properties, another command is running, reads that properties, updates something else. That would be a real mess and source of numerous race conditions. We do not want that. So therefore, static command was set up in a way that static command as a whole, like every block of static command binding that has blocks, finishes at once, full command finishes at once, and it takes as long as the longest running block in the command. So for example, we have snail command block here, and then we have this command that just updates some property. This takes really short time, this takes very long time, but the updating of the view model does not happen until this the longest running operation has completed. The longest running operation in this binding is this. Binding won't update view model until it's all finished. If there was like 3 commands or 4 commands, the binding would evaluate only after all those commands have finished. So therefore, I want to bring your attention to this other line because I have seen some people make a mistake of thinking I made this mistake actually myself when this feature was first introduced. I wanted to go like, okay, so these are like statements. So I will first update some property here. I will tell user the operation has started. Then there will be the long-running operation here, and after it is finished, the user will see it's finished, it's done, right? So no, wrong, because as I've said before, the binding only updates view model after all calls have been completed. So until this call is finished, this and this won't happen, and after it has finished, these 2 properties will update on the same time, and the last in chain, which is this one, will take precedence. Let's try this button, start, not what you think, it's called this because the command is set up in a way that would lead you into thinking it will first write start and then it will write finish after 4 seconds, but this is not the case. It will finish in 4 seconds and then try to write the view model all at once. As I was saying, this is the start, not what you think button, and let's try it now. And as you can see, we wait 4 seconds and it only updates view model after the operation has finished and the last one in the block takes precedence. Therefore, I would like you to think about the block binding not as like not to fall into pitfall of thinking this is like statements. Those are not statements. This is just operator that separates operations that run asynchronously independent of each other, with the exception of updating view model that happens in the end. So, but there is one strange thing I would like to show you, or not strange, rather it's unintended use of the system, because as I said before in the demo with the calculator, arguments are evaluated first, and only then the calls on the server are evaluated. So let's see this binding. What happens here? Let's have a closer look. And so we have this command binding on the click, and so we have in the parameter of the function, which is like generic function of t, so it takes any argument, and here the parameter is evaluated first. This assignment expression actually returns value of string, so that's cool. And then we have the long-running operation as before, and then we have the updating of view model. It's finished. So I will let you take a guess what happens now. You should have guessed by now, by what we have been talking about till now, that what happens here is like this expression will get evaluated. So the view model is set to started, the snail text, and then the commands get evaluated, and then this block containing assignment gets evaluated in the end because it's setting the view model. So it replaces the text with it's finished, it's done. Over here we can try this. It updated with started, then the 4 seconds, and then it's finished, it's done. Yeah. So the parameters function is like really just for fun. What I did just for fun. It's like this very, very simple helper function that takes any parameter whatsoever. So we can do this kind of feature here. This is like, I do not really want people to use this in production code. It would be terrible for anyone who doesn't understand, who doesn't like really spend very much time digging into DotVVM fundamentals. But this is just to make you really think about what's happening in the pipeline of evaluating static command bindings. Like, if you want to achieve this behavior, I would really suggest, rather than doing this, have a look at, for example, postback handlers, and this is much cleaner way to do it. It's all around better because you rarely just want to set something, you usually want to do some logic about, so postback handler is much safer place to do it. But what I would like you to take from this is that there is a way to run multiple requests to the server or multiple operation in one binding, and the whole binding takes as long as the longest running operation in the binding, and only after the operation had completed, the view model is updated with the fresh data. Next, we have including page versus visible. This is just a simple question. You have seen this before with the main wolf. This just uncovers some fake looking animal. Like, imagine you have unicorns and just like horses with horn, and then you have like giraffe, and the giraffe is like, it's like horse but but looks like leopard and has this giant neck and 2 antennas on top, and like this is real. Unicorns aren't. Don't get it. But what I really wanted to say here is, these two pieces of code look really, really similar, but in terms of performance, they couldn't be much more different. Couldn't be much more different because in one binding I use visible, and for the other section in the code I use include in page. What's the difference? Looks similar, but it isn't. Visible is only just, I would say, shortcut to making something invisible, making the section invisible, and basically only thing it does, it sets style display none to the section, so it disappears from the page. Meanwhile, including page, it really deletes the section from the DOM. It completely gets rid of it. Challenge with visible is it doesn't delete the HTML from the page. It just hides it. So you have got tons and tons of elements that really there is no use for them being there. They just take space in the DOM and make your page slower because nobody sees them anyway. So that's why using including page is much better. We can have a look at inspect, when I have a look at inspect, there are the two sections. First one is this section, and this section with the including page, and you can see it's translated to some knockout binding. And when I hide the pictures, there is the difference. The difference is the visible part. Only thing that happened is like you have display none over here, but the part that had including page is completely gone. So that's about it. This was just a tiny little feature, but it can make huge impact on your web page, especially when you are using a lot of model windows, lot of details in your grids and so on. Another demo, we are going to have a look at another feature to make your experience with static commands and with fast loading .vm pages better. And this feature is called services. It's quite new. I think it's only taken shape in DotVVM 2.1, or if I'm not mistaken. And this feature allows you to call services from your .vvm web page. So let's have a look at the demo with services. And here you can see the steps to use service in your .vvm page. It's add service directive, and you choose your alias. This can be literally whatever, and then you put in the type and namespace and type for the service. But the difference from import command is that this service is injected as an instance. So this is normal transient per request instance that lives in your application. Let's have a look at the service and in the code here. So F12 again, and now we can see it's different from the static helpers we've been used to so far, because it's like literally ordinary class. Ordinary class, only difference is if we want to call members of this class like instance methods here, you see there is no static anywhere. You have to put allow static command. This will make .vvm recognize this method and perform validation that you are using only the methods that are intended to be used from JavaScript. So in here you can see simple service that loads quotes from JSON file, and then there is option to add new quote over here. The implementation isn't really that important. It just takes the text, creates new quotes, saves into JSON, and this part here is just loading from JSON file. So let's have a look at view model of this service demo. F7 to go to view model here, and over here we can see we injected this service in the constructor also, and we use it here to on start of application just load the data. But the same service we can use also directly from the markup, because we injected this code service as an instance. It is a trade-off, because on one hand you don't have any state. These services cannot be used with state. Saving state in them would be unwise. Those are not view models view models are for state, these service instances are to perform some kind of business logic. But the plus side is there are several pluses and they just continue. First, it's very lightweight. It's like one service easily injected over here, easy to use, and this service can also take dependencies in constructor. It can easily take, for example, .vvm request context if you need that. You can, in real world application, you would probably have like facades or in worst case database context or something like that. Usually I would advise against using facades directly as services and injecting facades directly into .vvm pages. I would much rather you thought of this as kind of controller setup, because it kind of behaves like MVC controller. It's an instance that handles your calls from the web page. So to set up this, we need to have a look at startup file, and in the startup file we have services that are set up. These services that are part of a Microsoft dependency injection. So we can take this service collection and extend them, but by adding transient object, transient dependency. And over here you can see we are registering two services. This one we are using right now, quote service, is registered here, and after it has been registered, we are free to edit in using service directive, choose alias for it, and then we can use it in the binding. For example, in here you can see we are using blocks, binding blocks to first add new quote into a list of quotes on the server side, and then we set the new quote to empty string so that user might know the quote has been saved and we can proceed with. Important thing to note here is because the services are stateless, we are returning here as a return type of the function the collection of quotes that has been updated with our new quote. And this may seem as it's fairly similar what we are doing in the view model with the classical approach, but over here, remember, we didn't post any quotes on the server side. Only thing that goes to server is parameter of this function call, in this case new quote, and what returns is list of those quotes. But if there were multiple lists on the same page, nothing else is returned, nothing else is serialized and deserialized again. I will show you then comparison with a way this would be usually done. First, let's try the example. Over here, we can see the example of some Elon Musk quotes. There are pretty serious one, like don't delude yourself into thinking something's not working, and so on, so on. So we will add something more cheerful in here, like I would like to die on Mars, not on impact though. And we will add this, and you can see it instantly updates. And in the network we can see the call. This is the response. First, let's take a look at arguments. Arguments is like only this text we are posting on the server, nothing else besides some 2 tokens for security reasons, and we have and response is results the whole collection that needs to be replaced because it's been sorted and it's been added to. But this may seem like quite a lot of data, but let's compare it with the way it's been usually done, for example, in DotVVM 1.0. And in DotVVM 1.0, what you will see here is much more data being transferred. Let's see here. So we have another page with Elon Musk memes, this time implemented directly, and in here we can add some quotes again. But first, let's have a look at this another implementation. You see it's been implemented in traditional way when we use regular command and we use add async method called on our view model. There is no service here, no static commands, only legacy.vvm stuff. So this is the view model. This does nothing else, just to call the service and says the quotes should be refreshed. And then again, over here, the quotes are loaded. This is what you might see. Like if it's not, if it's the first time we are on this page or the page needs refreshing, just refresh the quotes. This may seem like it's fairly similar and there will not be that much of a performance impact, but it will actually. Let's see the page here for just a minute, the diagnostic tools. Let me clear this up. Here we go. And I will write something here, like, for example, this famous, world famous, industry changing millionaire quotes that he said when he saw this picture was, "This really happened. Whoa. Ha 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 ha." And we add that, and it's been added, and now we take a look at what's the difference. This is the request side, and before we had like nearly nothing being transferred, only the text we wanted to add. This is much different story. The legacy way of doing this will transfer whole view model. It means all of the 50 items in the quote list will be transferred to the server. Then they will be deserialized to the view model, so the quotes property might be filled. And then only after it's been refreshed, the quotes been reloaded, the response will be returned. And the response is, again, we need to refresh what has changed in the view model. So what's changed is the quotes changed, and also the refresh flag changed. So we will transfer this back to the client side. So what we are saving by using services and static commands is the only data that we really need to be refreshed or to be set on the client side are transferred. This here, DotVVM doesn't know whether or not you need something else changed in the view model, so it has no option, but when the request starts, it needs to transfer whole view model from client side to the server, because like DotVVM cannot know what you are going to change in the code behind of your view model. Like you may as well clear the quotes, or you may calculate something on them, or who knows. But when you are using static command, as previously shown over here, you are choosing. It's your choice what should be transferred. It's your choice what you will need. In the code, we can have a look. When we set the quotes, it's our choice we said like we will need the quotes, please update them. And nothing needs to be transferred because by calling the service, we decide what goes into arguments of services we call. So we decide what data will and will not get transferred. That has been little meme example to demonstrate differences in data throughput using old style .vvm and using services and static commands. And to really make this point, I did a variation of this page. Again, you have the quotes. We can have a look at the view model. This is the big data example. And you can see there is some suspicious looking grid view. And the grid view we are going to use in just a while. This is the section, it's the same we have had looked on before. So quotes are transferred using static command when we are adding to the collection of quotes. But to make this more interesting for us this time is like over here, notice we are using including page here. Notice we are using static command to load the data here. And over here, again in the sample, only thing that's new here is this quote from David Bowie. I never thought I would need so many people. And what do you think when I click this? Yeah, it loads, and it loaded over 5,000 records of randomly generated data of some fictitious company. So this has been quite a load on the web page. We can go to inspect here and run this piece of JavaScript. Only thing it does is goes document, get element by tag name, and we put placeholder star here to select all the elements on the page, and we ask for length, and we see the length of the DOM is currently 49,710 nodes in the DOM. So this is quite a load. This is what you may encounter if you have like some pop-up window. I have seen this many times in production applications, like customer would say something like, "Yeah, I need to load this grid, but please can you make like a detail that contains some more information about the detail of the row?" You go like, "Okay, fair enough. Let's do it as a modal window, or let's do it as a hidden part that will extend out and show the data of the client, and this represents like the hidden part." And then your customer will say, "Yes, but for each customer I would like to have a context, so for each row could you also load, when I open the detail, could you please also load like some additional information, like for example all orders that have been ever put in our system, so I can filter in them?" And you go like, "Oh, so for each of these 100 elements I now need to load like thousands and thousands of new lines." And so you may end up in really large DOM, and where .vvm has been your great friend until now, keeping track of all the data from the server and back, now it has become a burden, because now when you use classic command, .vvm will try to serialize and send all this data back to the server, so it can be evaluated, and then they will also then all those data that changed will be sent back. But you still got the step when .vvm is serializing like thousands and thousands of records to be able to send them to view model to server side. This is what static command really helps you with, because as you can see here, when I load the additional elements, I just do load dialog async, and I don't reload the quotes. I don't do anything else. I just fill the dialog window that has been previously null, and notice the including page that makes sure that as soon as I close the window, as soon as I set the data to null, the DOM elements will all be cleaned up for me. And another really useful thing is the same goes for the quotes. So, for example, now when I go to network and I clean it, so I add another quote like mark my words. I edit, as you would expect probably by now, it only sends the mark my words quote, nothing else. The data are happily living here. They don't need to be sent at all. And you can see here it's been updated. It's been updated like instantly. Like if I put test here and I put test, it updates instantly, even though I have like thousands upon thousands of items loaded here. And the best part, when I close this model, I set the data to null in my view model. So what happens is, let me check again the number of elements per this page, and it's like 99. It's nothing. They have all been cleaned up for me. One piece of demo I would like to try now is like what happens if I change this from static command to ordinary command. So I will make this command transfer all this data to the server and back, and I can guarantee it will not be very pretty. So we loaded. We should reload the page first. I forgot. So now it's reloaded, probably with the command in place. The data has been loaded, and let's try now with classical command how long it will take. And it's like, it took a second. Wasn't as bad as I thought it might be, but it sure took a second there. The craziest part is like you are sending these 5011 items back to the server, so the classical command can evaluate. But with static command, nothing like this happens. And this is really the point I would like to drive home here. Like, kind of, you have to change how you look at designing .vvm applications, because first, in .vvm 0.0, it was we designed the view model and we do everything in the view model. Everything that happens on the page, we will make a method for it. We will evaluate it on the server side. We will do the operation in the view model. We will use it was possible only to use static command. It was only possible to use normal commands, and so this was the only way of writing pages in .vvm. And it's not very traffic effective. Like on the smaller pages, it's okay, nothing bad happens. But as soon as you have like production applications with thousands and thousands of lines of data, and you have like complicated wizards and so on, it becomes much more complicated. And as I demonstrated you on this demo, I managed to make this application with static command really swift. Edits in the quotes part very instant, because I was using static command, because I wasn't sending data I did not need to the server. and back. So I would like to end with last slide of my presentation, where I summarize everything. Like if what I would like you to take from this lecture: structure your web page modular, like in modules. Use your view models so they can be easily replaced and easily updated. Like don't make messy view models where everything on the page is mixed together. If there are two separate use cases or two separate user stories on the page, use view models to structure the page according your needs, according to the data, and make it easy for yourself to update the data when you need to. Use service calls. They are cool. They can take dependencies. They can be injected as instances. They can do business logic, no problem for you. And if you are updating large data, use this. Especially, for example, awesome use cases like you have combo box, you just need to update the combo box, but you have really large grid. Don't send the whole grid back to the client so you can update one item in the combo box. Update the combo box using service and using static commands to make the data load on your application easier. Use I would advise against using visible. Use include in page, that because it erases the elements from the DOM, and if you are not showing it, you do not need them anyway. Like there might be special use cases when you want to keep some data when user comes later and, for example, unrolls some kind of roll-up or whatever. But in most use cases, users will not even notice. Just remove the unnecessary data from, or unnecessary model dialogues, grids from your DOM, and make it that much smaller. Make use of import, to make aliases, so you can call static types easily, and also once again, static command is your friend. To imagine how you could use static command on your page and only use classical commands, and only use the old workflow of going back to view model, changing stuff in view model using old school command when is really necessary. And there are use cases when this is necessary, but making this consideration of where can I use static command, what can I load on demand, what can I postpone, where can I save some data, when can I save some user time. This will make your applications a lot faster. So this has been all from me. And if you have any questions, I will be really happy to answer them. See you.
Hello again. This time we will be talking about productivity and controls you can use in .vvm. And I will have just a very short introduction, and then I will hand over to my colleague Michael, who will show you some nice features from Bootstrap for .vvm. So we frequently get asked how extensible .vvm is and if it's possible to use third-party controls within the framework. There is a few things to keep in mind. So the first fact is that .vvm is based on Knockout.js. So if you have any control or component or JavaScript library that is compatible with Knockout.js, it's a great thing because you can probably use it right away. When you have a view model in C# and it gets serialized and sent to the client, basically .vvm library builds a Knockout.js view model in the page, and it uses as normally as if you would use Knockout.js directly in the HTML. So you can use data bind syntax within the .html markup without any issues, and it should work. There are few special cases like that if you are using collections, so we are wrapping an extra observable around every collection item. And also, if you are using date time values, then probably some changes should be made because in order to prevent messing up with time zones, we are working with dates as strings in .vvm. So the dates are not translated to client's local time zone. Actually, there is one issue on GitHub that is quite complicated, and it concerns about supporting displaying date values in the client's local time zone. But right now the current state of .vvm is that if you look in the date time values in the view model, and if you look at the hour, minute and seconds numbers, then we translate this value in a way that those hour, minutes and seconds will be kept without any changes on the client side. So basically we are not supporting datetime offset, for example, right now, which is unfortunate, and we would like to add support for it. But what we can achieve right now is just not messing with time zones in any way. So the exact numbers that the user enters in their text box or datetime picker control, that's the same numbers you will see in the datetime struct on the server. So the hours, minutes and seconds will be as the user has seen them. This is the approach where we felt it will cause the smallest number of issues, but of course the problem of time zones is much more complex. So the date time are a little bit clunky, but the other date types would work without any issues. So you can use data bind, and if the control or component or library can work with data bind from Knockout, it should work. Also, you can, if the control doesn't support Knockout.js, it doesn't mean that you cannot use it in .vvm. You can, but you need to wrap it as a Knockout binding handler. And if you'll go to documentation of .vvm, sorry, I forgot to open this page. So .vvm.com/docs. And you browse to the control development section, there is a tutorial how to create custom Knockout binding handler, and also Knockout.js has quite nice documentation. So if you have any controls or components you are used to and you want to use them in .vvm, if you will create Knockout binding handler, then you can use these controls right away in the page. There is also a repo called .vvm contrib, which contains community developed controls. So if you have any controls and you've wrapped them as a Knockout binding handlers, you can actually submit a pull request into this repo, and you will see that the control will appear there, and we will build NuGet packages for you. So installing a control in the project is as easy as installing one NuGet package and adding one line into startup .vvm startup.cs. So these are community built controls. So you can look if the control you actually need is located here, and if not, you can create your own. We have also a project template for that, so it's quite easy. You just run this, and it will create a project with the control, a testing web app where you can try the control right away, and also a UI test project, so you can make Selenium tests that make sure that the control is working, at least in some simple scenarios. Yeah, so this is the .vvm contrib repo, and if you have any third-party controls, you can wrap them as Knockout.js binding handlers, and then you will be able to use them in .vvm. We have also the commercial product, so we have a Bootstrap for .vvm, which basically wraps all those Bootstrap widgets as nice .vvm controls with support of data binding, validation, and all those features of .vvm. So in my previous session 2 hours ago, you could see that I had a long piece of HTML code, which was basically the Bootstrap responsive navigation, and this code was created that I will just open the Bootstrap documentation and copy pasted that snippet and edited it out. In Bootstrap for .vvm, you can just write something like BS responsive navigation, and it's a control. You will get IntelliSense for all the properties this control offers and for all those inner elements. So you will see that there are some left aligned items, right aligned items, main content, and other things. So it's quite useful because it's very discoverable. Also, there is, for example, model dialog, which is programmed in a way that it works for data binding. So there is displayed property, which you can switch by switching a Boolean expression or flag in the view model. And also there are features like that. If you press escape key, for example, then the dialog will be closed, and also the view model value that is bound to it is displayed could be updated. So there are a lot of tweaks like that. So it's not only about wrapping and generating Bootstrap HTML. There is also quite a large piece of JavaScript functionality which we have added in order to make the experience even more natural and smooth. And there is a data binding support with some controls. So for example, there is a tab control which you can bind for the tab items, so you can generate your tab items based on some collection in the view model, for example. Then we have a second package which is called .vvm Business Pack, and it's another bunch of controls. They are not related to Bootstrap. They are our own controls which we needed on our own projects, and we hope that you will also take advantage of them. And there are controls for typically large line of business applications. So there is advanced grid view, advanced form controls, I don't know, multi-select, combo box with searching, autocomplete, datetime picker. There's tree view, list view, grid view with more features than the default grid view that ships with the open source framework. There is model dialog or model window, and plenty of other controls. So you can use that, and it is also themable, so you can use either our own theme which we have developed and which we have used on several projects, or there is a Bootstrap compatible theme. So if you are using Bootstrap, you can also convince these controls to look like they are part of Bootstrap. They are not related to the Bootstrap of .vvm. It's a different set of controls, but you can use these two packs together. And also this is just a bunch of CSS styles that will make the controls look in a Bootstrap look and feel. The business pack controls look like that. There are just some basic screenshots. You can see more in the documentation. So here are a few links. If you go to .vvm.com, so there is the products menu, you can see what is available in Bootstrap for .vvm and in .vvm Business Pack. You can also request trial version, so if you sign up on our website, you can ask for a 30 days trial. And again, if you need more time for testing this through, let us know and we will extend your trial and answer any questions you might have, because we really want you to have an opportunity to test everything before you make the decision. And there is the documentation. If you are interested in extending HTML, you should visit the control development section. Also, recently we have created an event called .vvm Virtual Meetup. The recording from that event is on our YouTube channel. So, and our colleague Standa showed some demos of how you can build your own controls in .vvm. So if you are interested in extending .vvm, make sure to watch this video, because it's a very nice tutorial of different kinds of controls and how to build them. And also there is the .vvm contrib repo. Okay, so that was a short intro from me. Now let's switch to my colleague Michal, who will show you some nice new features we have recently added to Bootstrap for .vvm.
Hello everyone, my name is Michal Tichy, and today I want to show you the new features in .vvm Bootstrap 4. But first, for those of you who are not familiar with the Bootstrap control pack, let me tell you why you might benefit from it. If you are mainly C# backend developer without extensive CSS knowledge, it will allow you to quickly create nice looking web applications. And even if you are seasoned front-end developer, sometimes it's not necessary to create everything from scratch. .vvm Bootstrap comes with more than 70 controls with full IntelliSense support. The controls are easy to use and do not require any prior knowledge of inner Bootstrap HTML structure. But let's jump to the new features now. The first of them is the icons. The Bootstrap contained glyphicon icons in version 3, but unfortunately they got removed with release of version 4. Now, during the preparations for version 5, the icon pack is coming back. The Bootstrap team has released new icons. There are more than 500 of them. The second feature is custom CSS. This time it's only possible to change the structure of generated HTML, and especially the CSS classes used only with inheritance. Unfortunately, this approach requires you to have extensive knowledge of inner .vvm workings and the way how the controls are constructed. The new custom CSS allows you to create new classes, remove the old ones, or completely replace or use classes. The custom CSS is configured via server-side styles API. It allows you to specify exactly under which conditions your new classes will be used. This is useful, for example, when you need to use some custom Bootstrap theme, which often requires you to modify some of the inner CSS classes. Okay, let's jump to a short demo now. First, we will try the new icons. The icon has the type property which determines which icon will be used. It supports hard-coded values, or you can use the bindings. This is the only property which can be set on the icon. Any other modifications needs to be done via your custom CSS. For example, you might want to rotate your icon. I've already prepared the CSS classes to do this, and I will try to apply them via this class attribute. Now you can see that the icon isn't rotating correctly. This is because the spin class is not present on the correct element. But unfortunately, via this notation, we are not able to move this spin CSS class to the correct place, which is here. This is the right usage for the custom CSS functionality. We want to replace this default BI class with our BI spin to allow the icon to rotate. This can be done via the custom CSS. First, we need to override which icons will be used for our icon control. We can specify all the classes by ourselves via the icon CSS interface, or we can modify just some of them. We will do exactly that. Okay. We want to override the by class, which is present in the icon property, and we want to modify it to be by and spin. Okay. We also need to tell our custom CSS class that we will be using our new spinning icon theme. Now the only thing left to do is to register our custom CSS in the DotVVM startup. We can register our new custom CSS for the entire application via the register bootstrap CSS method, or we can specify which control we'll be using the custom CSS. We can also specify some condition under which will be our custom CSS class applied. In this case, we specified that only controls with spin attribute will get our custom CSS behavior. So we can try it. Let's recompile it. Okay, now the icon isn't spinning because it does not have the spin attribute. But if I try to edit, everything should work correctly. Okay, nice. This is everything from me. I hope that you will enjoy the rest of the conference, and thank you very much.
Okay, now it's time for the last session of our DotVVM virtual conference. Thank you for staying with us for such a long time. I can imagine there is a lot of other things that you can do. However, I would like to share some information about our future roadmap. So what we are working on right now, what we are planning in DotVVM, and what you can expect. And of course, we will be very happy for your feedback. So if you have any ideas, any thoughts, any questions, feel free to send them in the chat here under the video or on our Gitter chat we have alongside our repository. Okay, so right now the current stable version of .vvm is 2.4, exactly 2401, because there was one little tiny fix, and we have some previews coming away, so there will be some few minor releases of 2.4, some few revisions. And the next minor release which is coming is probably 2.5. Originally we expected that we will go for 3.0, but there will be probably some other things we will need to release earlier than 3.0, so the next release will probably be 2.5. We don't have a time frame for that, but there are several features that are in progress, so once we are ready we will release them. There are of course some tiny fixes and some tiny improvements. We have focused on startup performance optimization because until now .vvm has one behavior which we don't really like, and it's basically discovering all the assemblies in the project and loading them because .vvm is trying to search for controls and data bindings and sorry, not data bindings, but .vvm properties and other artifacts that will be used for view compilation, and it causes some problems because it can slow down the startup of the application because not all the assemblies need to be loaded from the very beginning of the application. Some assemblies can be loaded once they are actually used, especially if they are connected with some not frequently visited areas of the application. And also it can make problems if you install .vvm in existing applications, because if the project code base is large, and it's on the .NET framework, there is a very high chance that you can have some unused references in the project, or maybe misconfigured references in the project. Sometimes the project references some library, it's not used, so until you try to load it, it doesn't make a problem, even if the assembly is missing from the bin directory or if the version doesn't match. But since .vvm tries to load all the assemblies on the startup, it can fire these exceptions. So we had some users reporting to us that the web forms project they have been working on, it worked, and when they install .vvm they get a lot of issues with loading the assemblies, and probably these were assemblies that weren't not necessary in the application, and probably they were misconfigured, but they failed to load on the startup. So this is what we try to avoid. It should increase the startup time, because the assemblies wouldn't be loaded when the application starts, which will also improve your developer inner loop, because when you do a change in the code and then start the application, you should wait for a little smaller time. And also it should help, especially with when you install .vvm in existing project where there can be some issues with the references. Of course, it's better idea to fix these issues, but if you cannot figure out why this assembly is being loaded and why it's needed, this feature can really help. It will be probably realized as an experimental feature. So the configuration of experimental features will be that you will call config.experimental features and name of the feature and enable, for example. Yeah, so something like that. And the next major release of .vvm we plan for 3.0. We have already created a branch in our repository, so we have already started working on some features. One of the most important features is rewrite of the JavaScript part of .vvm, and there are a lot of refactorings that were made there. We made .vvm modular, so in the future, if you don't use single page apps, the script that .vvm requires will be a little bit smaller, because we don't need to download the entire .vvm framework, which is currently about 100 kilobytes, but we can split it to multiple pieces. So for example, if you would use .vvm on a very trivial page where there would never be a postback, because there is no control that could do the postback, maybe we will achieve that .vvm would load only a tiny portion of it, and it could completely drop out the postback pipeline scripts. Yeah, so this is our aim. We try to make .vvm modular, and if this approach will be successful, we will probably do a similar thing with our commercial products, because right now Business Pack is also not modular, and it's not easy to separate it right now. But we are looking for support in the framework, and then we will be able to do these things to the commercial products too. So we could definitely hope for this feature in .vvm 3.0. And in current release in 2.4, we have two experimental features. First of them is very interesting, and it's server-side view models. Basically, we can cache the view models on the server, and thanks to it, the client doesn't need to submit the entire view model. So if the client clicks the button, then only a difference made to the view model on the client side is sent to the server. In some cases, it can save a lot of data, because if you imagine a page with a grid view, where all the rows in the grid view need to be persisted in the view model, then you, for example, need to delete a row, which is the fourth row in the table or something like that. So when you click the delete button, you didn't do any change to the view model on the client side. You are just calling a command to do something on the server. So basically .vvm wouldn't need to send the view model to the server at all because it is cached there. So .vvm will only send a cached ID of the view model, and this ID is basically hash of the view model contents. So if you, for example, create a public-facing web app where all the pages are mostly static and they have the same view model, the cache wouldn't be polluted by thousands of instances of the same view model because there is basically deduplication based on the view model content. So if 10,000 users have the same view model, there will be only one cache entry on the server. And also, because the cache can take a lot of memory on the server, so there will be some restrictions how many items can be cached, and you will be able to turn this behavior only for particular routes. So if you have a frequently visited page where the cache wouldn't work much, you can disable this feature for individual routes. But if the item disappears from the cache, so the postback would still work because .vvm will just get a response from the server, sorry, the item is not in the cache anymore, and the .vvm JavaScript library will immediately issue an additional HTTP request with the full view model, so the server can dispatch the command, and again it will send the diff of the changes to the client. So even if the cache is not reliable, even if you lose your cache, the users shouldn't see anything, only their first postback will take a little bit longer because it can be 2 HTTP requests. So again, on problematic, unstable networks, this feature may not be the best thing you can do to your users. So if you expect, for example, the users to use your application from areas from the areas in I don't know, mountains or something like that, the reception is not great, maybe that's not a good idea to turn this feature on. But if you plan your application to be used by a limited group of users, maybe if it's some line of business application with only hundreds of users, then you can expect that the caching could help a lot because there will be much less data transferred between the server and the client. And since there is not so many users, the requirements on the server resources may not be so high. So this is a feature. It can be enabled just for routes, so you can also try on which routes it actually works and which routes it actually helps. We also will have some tooling that will help you to visualize on which routes, how many cached items there are, how much bandwidth was actually saved, and things like that. So you could make informed decisions about where to turn this feature on. So this is an experimental feature. You can turn it on, and we will be publishing the diagnostic tools that will show you data from this feature very soon. So hopefully this can help, and we will be for sure doing some virtual meetups based on this very topic. So if you are interested, follow us on Twitter or on our YouTube channel so you would not miss this event. Okay, the next feature that is already in 2.4 is a better support for progressive web apps. Right now we have implemented the lazy obtaining of cross-site request forgery tokens. When you open any page in .vvm and look at the view model that is embedded in the page, there is the CSRF token, it's basically a security feature that prevents some kinds of web attacks. But the problem is that for every user, this CSRF token is different, which means that if you would like to cache this page, it's not a good idea because the token would be same for everyone. Yeah, and the token also has to correspond with the cookie that the user has. So this is another problem where this basically prevents caching the rendered HTML. But this feature, the lazy CSRF tokens, it works in a way that on the first postback, the CSRF token is obtained lazily. So the first postback in the application will get 2 HTTP requests actually, because on the first one the client will ask for a CSRF token, and when they get it, then there will be a next postback immediately, which will do the actual job. And so this is one of the things that is already implemented. And the next thing is that in the future we plan to auto-generate service worker rules for caching. So basically, if you have attended this conference yesterday, my colleague Roman, he was showing some demos of PWAs in .vvm, and right now you need to write your own service workers, but in the future we plan to auto-generate the service workers for you. So you could, for example, for each route you could specify a caching strategy, and .vvm would generate a service worker for you based on these settings. So this is what you can use. And if the lazy tokens, the HTML generated by .vvm is same for every user, so now it will be possible to cache it or embed it in the mobile app as a part of the application. Yeah, so this is why we added this feature, and we will continue working on it. Okay, how to turn the experimental features on? There is the config.experimental features, and there is the name of the feature, and you can enable it, or there is enable for specific routes, or you can enable for all routes except for these following routes. So it can be configured. Some features are global, some features are working on a per route level. So you will see from IntelliSense where this leads. Okay. Then we have some features that are in progress, and what has actually been implemented, and we will sorry, this wasn't implemented, the next one is already implemented. This is what we are currently working on. Basically, we want to allow more smooth work and interactions with JavaScript. Right now it's possible to write a script that changes things in the view model, but you have to be very careful because there is a lot of things that you can break. For example, the dates, as I mentioned previously, that the dates are serialized in a special string format we have. And if you store the date object in the view model, then some things might break. The same thing applies to the collections. If you work with the collections and you are not careful, you can break the validation, for example. So the client-side validation only, on the server it would validate, but you want to have those things in sync. We are thinking how to provide a safe way for you to update the view model from JavaScript, maybe from TypeScript, because when we are doing this, we also want to give you the TypeScript definitions so you could write strongly typed client-side code. And also, in some cases, you need to trigger a postback from JavaScript. And right now, the only way how to do it was by using a hidden button. So you would create a hidden button in the page and then click on it from JavaScript. And we don't like this, so we will provide some way to do this in a more convenient way. And you would get a promise, the JavaScript promise, I mean, by this term. And so you would be able to follow if the command was successful or if there was an error, so you can react for this. Because right now when you are clicking the button, you have no control over what happened with the postback, if it was successful or not. And also vice versa, sometimes you want to use some .vvm control, for example combo box, but when a value is changed, you don't want to trigger a server command, you just want to call some function in the JavaScript. So we are also looking for a way how to call JavaScript functions from your binding expressions. So this is better interoperability with JavaScript. We have some things already thought out, but the implementation is in a very early stages. Then we are working on a better support for public-facing websites. This is in progress. And basically, one of the popular ways of making your website loading faster is AMP.js, which is a technology from Google, maybe not, it's not accurate because there is a larger community around that. It's not only Google, but of course Google is pushing this technology forward. And the AMP is basically a restricted subset of HTML with some added features, and it's designed in a way that when the page is loaded, it can be rendered very fast, and the layout would be known from the beginning. So for example, if you are using images in AMP, you need to specify the aspect ratio of the image, so the layout doesn't need to be recalculated many times when the page is being loaded, because all the dimensions, or at least the ratios, are fully known. And AMP also contains a lot of components, so it also can simplify some things. But we have been thinking about generating AMP versions for your .vvm pages for you, because we have been writing a lot of projects in .vvm, and some of them are mostly static websites. For example, the main website of .vvm, it's written in .vvm, and there are some pages with quite a lot of functionality, but most of the pages are just almost static. There are some tiny moving pieces, but there is not many of them. And we were thinking about creating AMP versions for our documentation and for the .vvm website, for example. But writing this by hand is not, it's quite a lot of work. And also AMP has still some limitations, so to rewrite the entire website to AMP, this is not what we wanted to do. But since .vvm offers a way to use more abstract elements, like you are describing the controls, you can have special controls with more complex HTML being rendered. So we got an idea to auto-generate AMP for you. Of course, if you would use any control that would do something that is not allowed in AMP, then it would throw an exception. But if you restrict only to the controls and elements that are supported by AMP, we could do that. And also, we are thinking about making .vvm smaller and modular, and this is what I mentioned earlier, that is already in progress, and you can see it in our GitHub repo that most of the work has been done. And we basically took the JavaScript part of .vvm and refactored it into JavaScript modules. So now it's modular. We can split the framework into multiple smaller pieces, so we have a version with SPAs and without SPAs, and we are also thinking about extracting the postback pipeline as a separate module or bunch of modules and loading it only if it's really required. We are not sure if it's possible. We think that it should be possible, so if it's the thing we can do, we would do it, because it could save a lot of client-side code, because the postback handling code is maybe the biggest part of .vvm we have. It's a very long and complicated piece of code, so if we wouldn't need to have this code on all the pages, it would certainly help making things a little bit faster. So this is what I'm looking for. And also, we have been working on Selenium test helpers. This is a very old feature that we started thinking about a very, very long time ago. Then one of our colleagues has finally done the implementation, and now we are a little bit stuck in integrating it in the framework. However, it's a very nice feature that allows you to simplify building of UI tests, because it's a tool which can analyze your .html files and find for controls that can interact with the user. So for example, it finds for all text boxes and buttons and checkboxes and grids and all those controls, and it generates C# class, which is basically a page object. So it's an object which provides you accessors for all the controls that are in the page, and it's strongly typed, so whenever you change the page, this generated code will also change. and you can write Selenium tests against these page objects. So you are basically calling something like login text box, set text, something, login button, click something. And if, for example, there is a control that disappears from the page, it wouldn't be in the generated C# page object, so your UI test wouldn't compile, which is a great thing because one of the problems of UI tests is their maintainability. And many times when you do a change in the UI, a lot of UI tests can break, and this would allow you to detect which tests have been break during the compilation. So you would immediately see, okay, I have changed this page, I have to fix those 5 tests because they are using something that has been renamed in the page or that has been removed or made in a different way. Yeah, because the generated C# page objects would be different. So this is basically for strongly typed UI tests, which for me is also a very nice feature. However, there is still work to be done in the area of integrating this with the rest of the framework. So stay tuned because we would like to also release this feature quite soon. Better command line tooling. This is a little bit connected with the Selenium test helpers because one of the things why Selenium test helpers are not finished yet is because they are dependent on the command line tooling. Basically, we have a command line .vvm tool for quite a long time. You can use it for a lot of things, generating REST API bindings, adding new pages in the project, and so on. But this tool can have also much more possibilities, and we are working on a better version of this tooling because right now the biggest problem is that this tool needs to discover the configuration of the .vvm application, which means it needs to run it to the point that when it's able to load the .vvm startup file and to run the configure method on it. And the problem is that the being able to load all the assemblies that are necessary for this command line tool when you are running the application, it's not very easy. So this is what we have almost finished, but there's still some integration work in the rest of the framework. There are some dependencies to the Visual Studio extension which also needs to work with this. So it's not an easy thing to integrate, but we are working on this. So I hope that we'll be able to deliver this soon. We also have some long-term vision for .vvm. This is far beyond .vvm 3.0, but .vvm itself contains some abstract and high-level controls, but we want to make more such things. So, for example, some controls that would handle, for example, the login and forgotten password and all those processes connected with user accounts for you. This is one of the things we, for example, would like to provide. Of course it needs to have a lot of extensibility points, it needs to support custom templates, it should also be extensible for the specific way of authentication, for the specific authentication model, so you could integrate no matter if you are using ASP.NET Identity or if you are using anything else to persist user accounts. This should be extensible. So this is one area also, and there is a lot of things like that. We are thinking about providing, for example, a special version of grid view that would render something else than a table in a mobile, on small screens. So basically it could be a combination of grid view and repeater, and you would just configure which columns are very important so they would display also on the mobile devices, and which columns should be displayed only if there is enough space on the screen. So there is a lot of things. Also, the master detail control could be very interesting. I've seen something like that in Xamarin, and maybe .vvm could offer these controls. There would certainly not be part of the .vvm framework. It would be some additional package you can use, and there will be a lot of interfaces and a lot of abstractions, so you should be able to plug these controls in your scenarios. Yeah, so this is our vision. This is the way where I can imagine to push the framework, but it's not the only direction, and it also depends really much on your feedback, because for us it's very important how our users and how our customers are using .vvm. So feel free to talk to us. We will be very happy to learn about how you are use .vvm, which features are crucial for you, and which of these roadmap and plans would be interesting for you. And also an area that is also quite interesting is custom control development, because we realize that building custom controls in .vvm is not as easy as it could be, and there is a lot of things you need to do. Also writing custom knockout binding handlers, or even rendering the HTML. There's a lot of areas we can make things simpler. So also, if this is interesting for you, let us know, because we have some ideas and we may be implementing some of them pretty soon in the framework. We hope that some of the improvements could make it in .vvm 3.0. Okay, so this is from our roadmap. Feel free to ask any questions or submit any suggestions or ideas. We will be very happy to talk to you, and also we would be very happy to welcome new contributors. So if you feel that you could implement some of the features or to help us with building .vvm, let us know. It doesn't need to be just commits to the .vvm repo. Even if you find some issues in the documentation or some things that are missing there, we would be very happy to accept pull requests for it. Also, if it's just an issue, something is not working the way you expect, or something could be done in a better way, feel free to submit your ideas. They are very important for us. And also, if you are using .vvm and for example, if you participate in any other communities, also spreading the word about .vvm is very important for us, because if you are satisfied, let your colleagues, let your friends know about .vvm. We want more people being playing with .vvm, using it, and giving us feedback. So this is, I hope this is my last slide. Yeah, thank you for your support. Thank you for using .vvm, and we hope that this content was interesting and useful for you. Let us know if there are any other topics that would be interesting to you, and we definitely follow us on our social media, because we will be doing more online live streamed events and also virtual meetups where you can discuss anything with the team members from the .vvm team. Here is the link for our Gitter chat, because these chats under the YouTube videos, they disappear over some time. So you can also talk to us on our Gitter channel. There is gitter.im/riganti/.vvm. We have the link also on our website. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask us in any way, this YouTube chat or this Gitter chat, or email, any way you prefer. We don't care. We will be happy to talk with you. So we hope that .vvm will help you building new web applications using MVVM approach, or if you use .vvm for modernizing web forms apps, we'll hold your fingers. We hope that it will work for you, and let us know if you run into any issues. Thank you very much, and I hope to see you next time on our social media and YouTube channel. Goodbye.